Good morning. We'll get started here in just a minute as we have attendees filtering in. Good morning and welcome. We'll get started in just a minute when the participants start to level out. Okay, I'd like to be respectful of everybody's time and get started as close to on time as possible. Hi, my name is Annalisa Bevan and I'm the California Air Resources Board Zero-Emission Infrastructure Specialist. My role is facilitating and coordinating infrastructure activities across all of our zero-emission sectors for CARB and working with our state agency partners and stakeholders around issues involving zero-emission infrastructure. Today, we're holding an infrastructure work group meeting, specifically focused on business considerations. And as many of you know, CARB is developing the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, which would require fleets to transition to zero-emission trucks. This, coupled with the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation rulemaking, will be pivotal for achieving our health-based air quality standards, reducing near roadway exposure to transportation emissions for communities burdened by diesel toxic air contaminants, and reaching our climate change emission reduction goals. In the course of developing this regulation, issues have been coming up around the infrastructure needs for this transition. We've held a forum on infrastructure, and we've taken comments at a number of workshops and work group meetings. And from that, it's clear that we needed a platform for a more focused conversation about infrastructure, where we could spend more time hearing from stakeholders about their concerns and questions, and bring in our partner agencies to the table to have a more complete conversation about what's happening in the state to support zero-emission infrastructure. So the purpose of this work group meeting is primarily to inform and support the Advanced Clean Fleets rulemaking, but we also want to foster dialogue between stakeholders about infrastructure issues and solutions more broadly. We want to connect the work of the Advanced Clean Fleets rulemaking with the important work of our sister agencies, and we want to identify actions and ongoing discussions that will support the transition to ZEVs. The format we're undertaking today is a little bit different than what we've used in the past. We asked participants in our notice to identify if they'd like to be in a speaking role during this meeting. We selected around 30 participants to be work group members or panelists, and we're looking for a robust, constructive conversation about the topics on our agenda today. We invite all attendees to participate via the Q&A chat box. And if you weren't selected to be a work group member today, it may be because more than one person from your organization applied to be a panelist and we only chose one. You identified areas of interest in the survey that more closely matched a future meeting, or we already have broad representation from your sector. Either way, your voice is important to us, and we welcome your input through the Q&A box, and we can discuss setting up a one-on-one meeting if that would be appropriate. We are recording today's meeting and we'll post it to our YouTube channel when the recording is ready. We're going to start off today with a few short presentations from our partner agencies about the programs they administer to help introduce the state agency team. And then we'll run through quick introductions of the work group participants, name, affiliation, and the sector you're representing, and where you operate broadly, if it's a specific part of the state. And then we'll work through the topics on our agenda. Finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of what we've heard throughout the morning and identify any next steps that we heard. Today's topic is business considerations. We want to cover topics such as how fleets decide between fuels, site and property considerations, business models for fueling, whether that's on-site, off-site, or fueling as a service, permitting, and the benefits of hosting zero-emission fueling. There may be other considerations as well, and we welcome discussion of these as well. We want to be careful, however, that we don't stray into the topics that we're going to cover in future meetings. Specifically, we'll be holding a work group meeting on hydrogen on December 16th, and we'll have work group meetings on electricity and grid issues and cost and funding in January. It may be hard to stay out of those areas, but please understand if I interrupt and push these topics off to a future meeting as we go through today's discussion. We're here to listen, to facilitate conversation, and to work through issues. I hope that we can avoid prepared remarks, presentations, and non-constructive dialogue. As part of facilitating dialogue, please don't be surprised if we have follow-up questions. And so before we start, I wanted to extend my thanks to our partner agencies for joining us today, presenting and being a part of the conversation. I want to thank our work group members for offering to be a part of this dialogue, and I thank all of you, all of our participants, for contributing to this conversation. With that, I'd like to introduce our CARB team and our state agency partners. From CARB, we have Leslie Goodbody and Catherine Garrison, who have been organizing this meeting and helping me with infrastructure issues and projects. Bruce Tudor, who manages infrastructure projects. Tony Brazil, Craig During, and Paul Arneja, who are part of the leaders on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, and Wente Yin, Brandon Rose, Aria Berliner, who have been assisting with meeting preparations and are helping to facilitate the meeting here today. From our state agency partners, we have Elizabeth John from CEC, who will present, Julia Schmidt from CPUC, and Tyson Eckerly from GoBiz. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth to start with our introductions from the state agencies.
Elizabeth, we cannot hear you.
We're still not able to hear. Shoot.
Elizabeth, it looks like you're calling in from your cell phone. Are you muted on your, I know it sounds silly, but are you muted on your phone as well? Okay.
Hi, this is Leslie. Elizabeth has expressed that she's had some connection issues. Maybe if it's okay, could we move to someone at GoBiz or PUC, and then while Elizabeth works this out?
Yeah, Julia, are you ready?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I would first like to thank everyone for joining us on Friday morning. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the CPUC's role. As Annalisa mentioned, we'll really dive into electricity and grid issues in the first January workshop. But I did want to go over the fact that we regulate the major investor-owned utilities in the state who play a substantial role in transportation electrification. First and foremost, they provide the grid, which will supply the fuel for the fleets of future EVs that we expect. That involves most especially right now, upgrading the distribution grid to serve more and more load. We have several proceedings in which we're considering what kinds of upgrades are needed. Potentially transmission upgrades may be needed, and certainly we'll need to provide the generation or the capacity on the grid to serve the new load. That being said, we have a variety of planning processes underway. We are considering more and more TE load coming up in our demand forecasts. So we're confident that we will be ready to meet that load when it comes. In addition, utilities also design and provide a variety of rate options for electric vehicle customers. Every major utility now offers specifically EV options for both large commercial customers and small residential ones. These are intended to incentivize conversion to transportation electrification, and in almost all cases can provide fuel cost savings, most especially if customers can charge off-peak. Finally, utilities run a variety of programs that can also provide funding for behind-the-meter EV infrastructure. There is a variety of medium and heavy-duty programs in particular, covering sectors from forklifts, school and transit buses, drayage trucks, and so forth. And those can provide rebates for the infrastructure on the customer site, and in some cases up to and including the charger itself. And finally, most importantly, we just implemented a variety of new rules and tariffs for the utilities to carry out Assembly Bill 841. And that essentially ensures that EV customers will not be paying for in front of the meter or utility side upgrades to the electric grid. And those rules would be in place for a number of years before they're reconsidered. So I think that covers the basic functions of the utilities. Happy to take questions. Thank you, Annalisa.
Thanks. Have we figured out how to hear Elizabeth?
I think we're still working on it. Maybe we can go to Tyson.
Okay. Tyson?
Great. Well, thank you. And I think we'll pull up a few slides, but just kind of met a lot of you, but not all of you. So I'm Tyson Ackerley. I'm the Deputy Director for ZEV Market Development at GoBiz. And so if you think about GoBiz and our role, we're really kind of a player coach, so to speak. And so I was going to start maybe from the coaching side and then the playing side. And so if we go to the next slide, our North Star is really the executive order that Governor Newsom signed in September of 2020. You know, all those 100% targets, I think we're all very familiar with. And so as part of that executive order, he tasked GoBiz with developing with all of our agency partners a ZEV market development strategy. And that's, if we go to the next slide, it's been a really collaborative cross-agency effort to help organize all of our efforts around really the 4 pillars of the market. And maybe Catherine, we can go to the next one there. And those 4 pillars are really, it's vehicles, it's infrastructure, it's end users, and it's workforce. And the idea being all 4 of those need to be in balance to help accelerate the market. And I think today, and well, always, but we're really, really focused on the end user perspective. How do we make it easy for fleets and consumers to transition over to zero emission vehicles? Are you able to go to the next slide, Catherine? Well, we'll just roll with it. So and the slides, we can post the slides. That's no problem. So the other piece I wanted, so on slide 4, which you can't really see, I don't know if it's a delay on the thing, but there is our website. And so on our website, we have a bunch of information around the ZEV strategy, probably more information than anybody wants to go into, but I think we try to lay it out in an accessible format. And one of the important things is having what each state agency is doing. And so we have 29 state agencies who are active in the ZEV market development strategy, and each agency submits annual agency action plans. Kind of what are they doing under each of the objectives that have been laid out in the ZEV market development strategy, and all of those objectives tie back to core pillars. And in this, I've circled, let's see, yeah, I don't know. I guess it would be helpful to see the things. But so anyhow, when we do the slides there, I've circled all the agencies that have infrastructure roles to play. So you can kind of go through there. And each of these action plans are meant to be short and concise and easily accessible. So that's kind of, and our job at GoBiz is to help pull all the pieces together. So it appears to be one coordinated state effort to the end user. And we're always looking for feedback and help to make that happen. And part of that is, through avenues like this workshop. So that's kind of the coach side. On the player side, we do a lot with ZEV readiness and helping local communities with permitting, helping infrastructure installers with permitting. If you go to Google and search, GoBiz ZEV readiness, it'll pop up 2 websites. One of them is the plugin readiness. And so we have a bunch of plugin streamlining efforts. So there's a map of California and it shows all the jurisdictions in green that have already streamlined. Oh, there we go. All right, we're in it. We have a permitting guidebook. We have a scorecard. We're updating our fact sheets to come out. And so there's a lot of information there. Ideally, the cities and counties that are in green will be easier to permit, but also in red, we're hoping to accelerate there too. And so if you run into any issues in getting infrastructure permitted, you can always reach out to GoBiz, and we're happy to go in and talk with the community and help talk them through it. If you go to the next slide, we have a lot of work on hydrogen stations as well. We have a guidebook there. There's a purchasing a hydrogen fueling station buyer's guide that we helped co-develop with the California Fuel Cell Partnership, and also kind of some videos there as well. And so a lot of times with hydrogen, it's new to local communities. We've done a lot of outreach. We go in and talk to them and make sure that they understand, kind of the codes and standards, what's going on, what's behind all this initiative, all the safety stuff that's there to, make sure we address any concerns up front and make the permitting process much easier. And so with that, I think the next slide just has my contact information. We'll post these slides however we want. And, we're definitely, so you have my email there. We also have a general email, zev@gobiz.ca.gov. But we're happy to help anybody as you're working to get stations in the ground. And then also as far as coordinating across all the state agencies, especially if things are making your life difficult. We want to make it easy. And with that, maybe I'll hand it back and see if Elizabeth is ready.
Are we having any luck?
Yeah, so yeah, we've been working on it behind the scenes. But first, while we're still working on it, because Tyson's slides were not advancing through, and so it's not showing up on the video, I guess we would like to be able to post them. But that's something that we're gonna have to discuss internally, because to post anything on our CARB's webpage, it has to be ADA compliant. So that's going to be just a question we'll have to respond to later.
Okay.
Aria, if Elizabeth is listening in, is there a phone number that she can call?
Yes, there is. She can call in. I will send her an email with that information really quick.
Okay.
All right. Sorry. Thank you.
So we do have another activity that we were going to run through before we get into sort of an open conversation. Catherine, would you like to describe the exercise? And maybe we can do that while we're working on getting Elizabeth's presentation.
Yes, we thought we would do a word cloud with you. And so we wanted to hear from everyone who's joining us today, what keeps you up at night? So let me share my screen and give you some instructions on how to do that. So you're able to join this. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you're able to put in, if somebody could put into the chat that hyperlink, polev.com, and if you can just click on that and then enter in this code, Crystal Laza 824, that would be great. You don't need to set up an account. And you can also join us from a text. So from your phone, if you would like, you can put that Crystal, CHRISTALL AZA824. And then once you do that, you type in 22333 to join. So when you're able to do that, we want you to type in a word. And if you're thinking more than one word, then you can go ahead and join them by putting a dash in between. For example, I'm very passionate about saving the planet. So if you wanted to put in 3 words, save the planet, you would put save dash the dash planet. Yeah, so we're reloading the page.
I'm gonna guess clicking the activate button. There you go.
Yeah, so we're seeing some words now. Wow, we're seeing lots of words now. So we're having cost seems to be one of the major themes now. Bottleneck is a smaller one. Green hydrogen production, grid capacity. Are there some themes standing out at you, Annalisa?
I think you're seeing this. Timing is coming up, capacity, costs. I think if we added cost and costs together, it would also, is there a way to zoom in?
I am trying to figure that out.
Let's try throwing the meeting up on a bigger screen for me. There we go. So yeah, costs, capacity, timing, grid capacity, reliability, small fleets, scalability, accessibility.
Did you mention reliability?
That's yeah, that's starting to pop up. Reliability, grid capacity, and cost are probably the 3 largest. Stranded assets is starting to trend a little bit.
I see statewide hydrogen infrastructure availability becoming a little larger.
This is always interesting to watch in real time.
Yes, and my apologies. I have it on the largest screen I have. I think the sheer number of people we have joining has made it so it's smaller font. Oh, I see an interesting one about not owning the land.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Interoperability, resilience, availability. Oh, there we go.
Awesome.
Logistics.
Disproportionate burden on DAX.
Okay. Let's give another 30 seconds for this, and then we will resume our agenda.
I saw funding come up. Timing's another one. Interoperability is coming up. Stranded assets.
Okay. Let's it won't stop. Okay. So Kathy, can you screen capture that so that we can keep track of it?
Yes.
Definitely costs and reliability, accessibility, issues like that are forefront in our stakeholders' minds. And so let's try one more time with Elizabeth and see if we are able to hear her.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Let's go ahead and hear from you, and then we'll jump into our agenda.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth John, and I'm the manager of the Medium and Heavy Duty Zero Emission Technologies Office at the CEC. And I'm really excited to be here today, and I am looking forward to hearing from all of you about what challenges you face as you move towards zero emission vehicles and what solutions you think are necessary to fully build out the infrastructure needed in California to support these vehicles. So for EVs, I'll state the bottom line up front. California needs a lot of electric vehicle chargers to support its clean transportation goals. And while the CEC has made progress in accelerating the deployment of EV charging, CEC models project that roughly 180,000 medium and heavy duty vehicles will need about 157,000 high power chargers in 2030. And these chargers are going to require a high amount of power, ranging from 50 kW all the way up to several megawatts. So the amount of power needed, along with the time it will take to make the necessary upgrades to get power to sites, could be significant. But I think it's also important to talk about charging infrastructure in the context of the energy system to show the benefits that transportation electrification promises. Electric vehicles can be valuable for California's power system. They're often plugged in for longer than they need to charge, which gives an opportunity for smart charging. And vehicle grid integration could really make the grid more economical to operate, cheaper for ratepayers, and more resilient. So I'm really excited that the agencies, CEC, CPUC, CARB, GO-Biz are on this work group, and we're working closely together to address the barriers to transportation electrification. And I think it's going to be incredibly important to engage stakeholders early and often to be able to reach our zero emission goals. And then for hydrogen, California anticipates reaching 100 stations by the end of 2023. And with the Clean Transportation Program allocating funding to 156 stations and the private sector announcing an additional 23 privately funded stations, the state expects up to 179 stations by 2026. And to date, the Energy Commission has also awarded nearly $38 million in funding to support medium and heavy duty hydrogen refueling infrastructure for applications in the freight and transit industries. But as ZEV sales increase and the market moves beyond early adopters to mainstream consumers, additional public investment will be essential to addressing more challenging infrastructure needs. And the recently signed state budget included over $1 billion to the CEC over the next 3 years to support zero emission vehicle infrastructure deployment. Part of that funding targets 1,000 drayage trucks, 1,000 transit buses, and 1,000 school buses on the road with supporting refueling infrastructure. As a state lead for ZEV infrastructure, the CEC is closely coordinating with the California Air Resources Board, which is the state lead for zero emission vehicles. And our agencies are collaborating on multiple grant programs to provide a seamless experience for grantees wishing to invest in both ZEVs and infrastructure. And then furthermore, as part of that funding, the CEC is starting a block grant project for MDHD ZEV infrastructure called Energized Commercial Vehicles. And this project is expected to complement vehicle incentive programs such as HVIP with the necessary infrastructure funding. It will offer a streamlined process for applications, and funding is expected to be released in early 2022. The implementer CalSTART is currently in the design and stakeholder engagement process, and if you're interested in providing feedback to that, comments are due today. So I'll quickly close by saying that it is feasible for California to meet its aggressive goals, but we'll need to do a lot of the following together. We'll need to continue public support using public funds to leverage private funds and eventually transition to a self-sustaining private market. We'll need to continue quantitative modeling efforts for MDHD vehicles to project the quantities, locations, as well as load curves of chargers needed to meet statewide travel demand. We'll need to support innovative charging and refueling solutions and financing mechanisms. We'll need to support local efforts to prepare for the infrastructure, including planning efforts. Especially, we can't ignore real estate, space constraints, grid connection, other factors that might influence the bus solution for your fleet. And then we'll also need to ensure equitable distribution of infrastructure deployment throughout the state and align charging with renewable grid and grid needs with a focus on vehicle grid integration technologies and policies. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion this morning to hear from all of you. And I'll quickly introduce Michelle Vader, the supervisor of the Freight and Transit Unit, who's also on the call today and listening. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad we were able to make your audio work. It's super important to us to be able to be here with our state agency partners. As Elizabeth said, CEC is running point on infrastructure activities, but CARB, we know that on the vehicle side, we can't make it work without the infrastructure. So we're really grateful to have our state partners here today. I have a request before we get into our conversation part of the workshop, work group meeting. If you're a panelist and your card, your name is displayed as just your first name, if you could add your last name and your affiliation, that would be really helpful. So the way we're hoping to move into conversation here is with we've sort of broken out different topics within business considerations, and we have some leading questions and a little bit of expectation of who we might call on to start with to get the conversation rolling. But then we're going to open it up for open dialogue, and we'll let that roll for a set amount of time, and then we'll move on to the next one. And we'll have some open time at the end for the issues that don't get captured within any of those set topics. So I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, and we'll get started with our first topic.
Great, thanks, Annalisa. We felt like the conversation about just talking about electricity versus hydrogen would be a good way to set the stage, but really it's a conversation to set the stage to hear from our very experienced fleets as well as other fleets about just their thoughts and experiences on alternative fuel infrastructure altogether, only because it's anytime you swap a fuel out from conventional, it's a brand new challenge. And so we do have a number of folks on the panel today who have a lot of experience. So I was going to start out by asking those folks. So I'm hoping that some of our panelists who are with fleets, and specifically I was looking at Sal Yamas, Tony Williamson, but then again, there are probably others who have experience with natural gas, could be hydrogen, could be electricity, any of these alternative fuels, where you have been operating a fleet, where you have also had to provide the fueling infrastructure for that fleet, to just raise your hand, and when we're called upon, just talk about your experiences, the experience of establishing that fuel infrastructure, experiences with the vehicles themselves and the interaction between the vehicles and the infrastructure. So that's just a general stage setter. And I kind of already gave these guys a heads up that I was going to want to have them share their experiences. You know, if you could keep it down to 3 minutes, that would be ideal, only because we have a lot we want to cover. But so can I see some raised hands from those folks? Or if anybody's ready to start?
We actually have our first raised hand, Eddie Phillips from BNSF. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, very good, thanks. So with regard to the first question of electricity or hydrogen, we don't view it as an either or, and that's because we view this as being dependent on the duty cycle or use of the vehicle or equipment. So for example, some vehicles are best paired with batteries because they're facility bound. They never leave a facility. So not drayage trucks, yard trucks would be in that category. They run back and forth within a facility. They have the opportunity to charge during breaks. And our experience with this, and we have 3 facilities that have electric yard trucks, they're doing very well. The hiccup is actually on the infrastructure side. We're on our 3rd infrastructure charging provider because we have high rate of failures on the charging cabinets and dispensers. And we just installed a whole fleet of chargers in Stockton, and they're about a month old. And on a daily basis, we have up to 9 of the 15 chargers that are down for one reason or another. And the provider cannot seem to figure this out and keep those running. But with regard to hydrogen, we have different fleets, and I don't know how many companies in this workshop have multiple fleets. We have fleets that are captive to a facility. We have fleets that are not. We have about 1,000 trucks that leave our facilities and go out and do work on the right of way. They have a much larger power demand. They're typically working 12 to 16-hour days. During that time, they have power needs that the battery technology of today cannot meet. So we're thinking that for those vehicles, and they're all 4-wheel drive, by the way, they're going to need some sort of a hydrogen fuel cell power supply. And right now, we don't see a lot of manufacturers in that space. There's one that is an OEM. All the rest that we see are third-party aftermarkets. But some other considerations is not, that I think everybody should consider is it's not just about the range of a battery electric. It's also about the power demand, as I kind of explained, that when you have high power demands and a lot of trucks and a lot of vehicles and equipment in California have high power demands, but only travel short distances. And when you talk about those types of power demands, you're also talking about public fueling. And the public fueling has to match up with the phase-in requirements under the ACF. Otherwise, you're going to have stranded assets. And that's, certainly one of the things that came up on the word cloud. So when Elizabeth from CEC said that they're going to have almost 200 stations by 2026, remember the 10% requirement for trucks begins January 1st, 2027. 200 stations is roughly 2% of the 10,000 public fueling stations we have in California. So we're pretty concerned about the ability of our trucks to get hydrogen or to recharge. And then there's not just our vehicles, but other vehicles as well out there, whether or not there's going to be publicly available hydrogen or charging that can occur within 15 minutes. So it's high rate of charge. And then our other concern is with the utilities and the railroads and other companies that provide essential public service. How will those services be interrupted, and will those services be able to continue to provide that essential public service on a one-to-one vehicle basis, or are we all going to need to buy 1.5 trucks for every truck we have today because of the downtime? And then of course, I know you said this isn't really a cost workshop, but let's bring in the cost. Our experience is that the total cost is roughly 3 to 4 times that of a comparable diesel. So trucks are about double, and our infrastructure experience for battery electric is about $133,000 per vehicle, not per facility. So the total cost before any grant subsidies for us is right around $390,000 before any grant subsidies.
I have a question. Do we have any sense of what the reliability issues are? You said the provider isn't able to figure out what's going on, but what kind of failure mechanisms are you seeing?
Can I just chime in for just 1 second? Because Eddie, are you talking about your early demonstration that started back in 2016, 17 with the multi-source facility?
Well, we have, when I'm talking about battery electric yard trucks, we have 2 facilities that are 4 years old. They've actually constructed and been running for 4 years. But the most recent one, Stockton, is only about 5 weeks old.
Okay, so
So,
yeah, so
we're-
maybe could you speak to what Annalisa's question relative, the newer technology relative to the older one? Because I do think that it should be a difference there.
Well, long term, the 4 years we've had those 2 facilities running, we see about half the chargers are down at any given time. They're showing error messages. Those could be because of something, the wires are loose or they weren't properly connected. We see software issues. We see the chargers flipping breakers. So you basically got to reboot your computer every day to get these things running. And there's also, when we are using foreign suppliers, which we have been, there's a huge problem with getting parts, getting service. One of the things that we've learned from this experience, this trip so far, is that we're going to have to include in our RFPs some sort of a service guarantee for uptime. If they can't guarantee a 90% uptime for the first 2 years, we don't want to talk to them. And we've experienced that. Like I said, our Stockton facility, which is the first facility we own that has 100% zero emission yard truck fleet, we can't, the chargers, about half of them are down, or more than half of them are down. And we've got the manufacturer and supplier on site full time. And at some point, they've been out there for over a week now and trying to solve these problems. And every day they give us an update, and every day they can't get them to run. And we're thinking about telling them, if you can't provide the performance and the uptime, we have no alternative but to, go with someone else and pull these out. So I just want to caution everybody, while manufacturers will promise lots of things, the real world for us has been that there's a gap between what the manufacturers are saying they can deliver and what our real world experience has shown us. And so, nobody wants to end up with a fleet of DeLoreans. We don't want to be first out of the gate and can't use anything. They look pretty, but if they can't run, then it's no use to anyone.
Well, thank you, Eddie. I would love to give another person an opportunity to chime in. Perhaps if one of the fleets that have their hands raised have maybe a newer, more recent experience, because I am familiar with Eddie's project. It was an early demonstration, and we know that the technology has improved over time. This is how these projects do work. So, Lisa, would you like to share? Gotta unmute, girl.
Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Lisa. I've run a fleet since, so we have been an early adopter that period of time with the newer technology. Had many. I'm happy and very pleasantly can say that we also launched a second deployment in 2019. And I can just tell you it's a night and day experience in terms of the uptime, the efficiency. They've got high voltage, fast charging in the vehicles. They run about 250 miles a day. I've looked at data for 730 days. Those vehicles have about 80,000 miles on them today. This could not be done without the right type of power related to the charging. It has provided flexibility. It has provided the opportunity to manage the charging without any really curtailment, because of that route happens to be a short route that's perfectly optimal for the type of technology. It's running in an airport operation in about an 8 to 9 mile round trip. They choose when to charge and when not to charge because it's just not a deal breaker, even though they're running 250 miles on a vehicle that has a 118 kilowatt hour battery pack. So it doesn't have more than a range of 150. The high voltage has provided many solutions for them in terms of even reducing their demand fees, because theoretically they could simultaneously charge. They can charge always at peak time. I see when I look at the data, quite a bit. Multiple times throughout the day, that same vehicle will get back to 100% state of charge, simply because the driver, when dwelling, happens to have plugged that vehicle in. So it's really come down to, in my opinion, behaviors related to the driver and the fleet manager's knowledge to be able to really optimize the technology when it works well. When it works well, there is so much more you can do with it. For example, on the cost side, we've also been able to manage pedal use with more experience. We stay in a free state. It's called a free state. Basically, you're moving the vehicle without any kilowatt hours being used because you're not using that pedal as much as you do with internal combustion engines. So I think there's a lot that we can learn by the technology as we get more experiences. There's just not enough experience on the road to be able to share some of these findings in a way that you're kind of technically getting involved in what the driver needs to do functionally to not disrupt it, and what he could do to change his behaviors to optimize the technology. I would say that as far as the uptime, it really is critical. Just hearing from the last speaker, the uptime is probably, I don't have any experiences I could share with as far as that we're having bad experiences. We're getting 95% of uptime. And that really has to do with, first of all, the quality of the product. And then second is the OEM really providing a service.
Hey, Lisa, are you speaking specifically of the charging infrastructure or the vehicle?
The vehicle.
I'd like to keep the focus on your infrastructure.
Okay, so both I'd say. So the uptime for the vehicle is one thing, but as far as the downtime and uptime associated with the charging, I would say that we have a mix. We use AC and DC, so we've got the high voltage charging. The AC has made us highly reliable because it works. It works like a refrigerator works. It never not works. We're not networked, so we have no issues with having to be shut up by any networking. Our DC is obviously networked, most is. It does experience more downtime than the AC by far. I think there's also interoperability issues when we go to a public charging station. So I think there's a lot that we could do on the medium heavy duty side when it comes to the interoperability of the DC.
We need to move on, but I was hoping to hear specifically from a fleet operator. I know you're exactly a fleet operator, Lisa, so I'm not disparaging you, but so we'll probably ask OEMs to chime in later, but I'm wondering if Sal is on the call because he does have experiences in operating all kinds of alternative fuel vehicles. And I'm hoping if he has experiences he wants to share briefly about those challenges. We were talking about establishing the infrastructure and then, that kind of thing. But if not, that's fine. Tony?
Good morning, everybody. Tony Williamson with TTSI. We are a third-party logistics company that operates in all the major ports of United States, and we have been demonstrating zero-emission trucks since 2011. First truck was a hydrogen fuel cell. We ran that truck since 2011, 2014. We thought that truck did exactly what the demo project was looking for, to see if it could be a viable vehicle in the drayage industry. In 2015, we started demoing battery electric trucks. And since that time, we have demoed 13 battery electric trucks. We currently have one that will demo in December. But in starting in 2022, we have another 7 that we'll be demoing. Our experience with the battery, I'll start with the battery electric. That was an eye opener. Our drivers were used to diesel. You get in it, turn the key, and start right up. So this was a total learning process. The first trucks in 2015, we were only be able to get 2 hours out of an 8-hour shift. He would go in the morning, run, pick up one load, drop it, come back to the yard, hook the truck up, and finish his shift with a diesel truck. after a period of about a couple of years, we were able to get that same truck up to 5 hours. Then the new technology started kicking in 2017, 2018. And currently we're able to get a 8-hour shift with a battery electric truck. Now we do operate those trucks no more than 25, 30 miles from the port. But we have now kind of, with our experience and knowledge, our drivers know how to operate that truck. Lisa McGee just said that, it was a learning experience. And as our drivers got more experience with these trucks, that we were able to get more time out of them. And then also, initially these trucks were rated to go 200 miles on a charge. That wasn't the case. We were getting like 50 to 75. But as our driver got more experience with the trucks, we were able to stretch it out based off of the operation, our operations. So now we plan on going zero emission as soon as practical. And I say practical, that depends on the technology. We are very, we know that the technology out there looks very promising. Some of the trucks that we will be demonstrating in 2022, we are at the point where after this demonstration, we can start talking about purchasing. We haven't really got into the total cost yet because the price points on these vehicles are just now beginning to come out. We got some issues such as the insurance, how much it's going to cost to insure these vehicles, and infrastructure that has been challenging. I want to talk to Eddie later on about some of his issues and concerns, but we are beginning to start planning out infrastructure. We're going to start out small with probably 10 trucks, battery electric, and then from there will depends on how we are going to add zero emission. We do not have a number in place of battery electric versus hydrogen fuel cell. We see it's going to be a mix based off our operation. But so far, we are very happy with the advancement of this technology. And as the years progress, we do see that battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell will be a viable option.
So at this point, we're already a little behind schedule, but I think the discussion is wonderful. And I do believe that there will be ample opportunity as we sort of move through the agenda to chime in on these subjects. I really wanted to give Annalisa the opportunity to tee up the next subject of dedicated versus public versus shared versus fueling as a service, mostly to keep the focus pretty solidly on fueling infrastructure. But also this will be a great opportunity for the fleets to chime in on their desires for those types of infrastructure as well as fueling. So Annalisa, I'm going to pass the mic on over to you. Sorry, we're unable to get everybody the opportunity, but there will definitely be more, and we're going to make sure we fair on how we call them.
I will ask if anybody who had their hand raised specifically wanted to talk about the choice between hydrogen and electricity, any analysis recommendations or issues like that. Maybe we can call on Jamie. I think we have some time.
Should I proceed? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I thought Eddie's overview of what Burlington Northern is dealing with was really right on. And as it relates to, there's opportunities for both technologies as we move towards zero. But I'd like to address, as you've asked, the infrastructure problem. And I think there's commonality in these challenges as we figure out how are we going to meet the governor's goals, the executive order with the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule and the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. I think we're seeing, and our particular experience is involved in deploying transit vehicles, fuel cell and battery electric, and trucks in the freight sector and off-road vehicles. And I think on the vehicle side, we're seeing solutions. We're seeing really good solutions. The technology there's still room for technology improvement, but we're seeing the ability to meet the fleet operators' requirements. Infrastructure is where it's at. And the challenge I see there are several. And it starts with the price of the alternative fuel. There are issues not just obviously with hydrogen, but also with electric charging. And the PUC spoke about what they're doing on the electric charging side. I'm hoping the PUC will look at the importance of subsidizing and helping the hydrogen costs that are associated with electric charging to help bring down those costs. But overall, price is a big factor. It's a big challenge, especially in hydrogen. It's just too expensive. It's not a commodity yet. Secondly, you've asked the question about real estate. For these operations, fleet operations, where they're in need of on-site fueling, they may have limited real estate to be able to provide these technologies on the fueling infrastructure. And so we've got to address how to minimize the space requirements. Burlington Northern mentioned the issue of numbers of stations, public stations, which are going to be critical for those fleets that operate long haul or regional haul and don't return to base. So we need to address fleet operators that do operate out of a central base, and fleet operators and independent truckers that need the access to fueling stations at truck stops or throughout the state. If we don't do that, as good as the vehicles can be, and they are showing, we're launching our program with Hyundai, which will have upwards of a 400 to 500 mile range for regional operation, but we need distributed public access stations to support that operation throughout the state of California. Additionally, the ability to fuel vehicles quickly is a critical factor for a fleet operator. So in order to handle multiple shifts, a fleet operator needs to recharge their vehicles in a fast period of time. The other issue we've got to deal with it is both resiliency, especially here in California, where we have earthquakes, wildfires, we lose the grid. How do these fleet operators manage their operation? Many of these in the vocational vehicle arena, utilities, Eddie, again, Burlington Northern, they have to be 24/7. If the grid goes down, they need to be able to still operate. And so infrastructure has to address resiliency, redundancy. When a transit operator has to refuel their vehicles in a very tight window of 8 to 10 hours at night, they cannot have downtime, or they will miss their primary mission during the day. So redundancy, resiliency, these are key factors. But I'll leave it at that. But those are very important challenges on the infrastructure side that we're going to have to address if we're going to meet the governor's executive orders goals.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Arvind?
Yeah, thank you. Arvind Kailas with the Volvo Group. Very nice to be among familiar faces. Thank you once again for putting this up, Leslie and Annalisa and all the other CARB staff. I agree with what my esteemed panelists have said so far, but the one thing that I will bring it back is based on, we're not a fleet, obviously, we're a transport and infrastructure solutions provider. We work with the fleets and we work with amazing partners. Our customers, the fleets and the dealerships, what we're hearing from them is basically just goes down to what their duty cycles are. Where are they operating? Within the same fleet, they can have different duty cycles. This can vary between an Ontario operation and an LA-based operation, for example. There are some fleets that are just not going to be ready for fuel cell. For them, the decision is easy. So I think it just really starts with bringing the fleets together, and really understanding what are sort of the different buckets of operations, if you will, and then figuring out where these high densities of deployments are going to be, which will really motivate and stimulate the discussions around charging infrastructure, especially those that are publicly accessible. So that's the first point. The second point that I wanted to add, in addition to what my co-panelists have said, is the workforce development issue is something that we have experienced being part of the Volvo Lights project. And by that, I mean uptime of the chargers. Again, bringing it back to infrastructure, right? These are new products, and this is not like plugging an iPhone or using the level 2 charger. These are high power chargers. There's concerns around safety, and there's some handholding that is needed in terms of how to use this, how to monitor whether these chargers are working or not. The driver comes in and he parks the truck, and now he has to step out and charge. That's an extra work, and that training or that recognition awareness needs to be built gradually. Furthermore, making sure that the truck is charging, and if the truck is not charging, is it a truck issue? Is it a charger issue? If it's a charger issue, who do you call? So little things like that actually are very important, and it surfaced many times during Volvo Lights, of which we are a part. And so we have been working with the EVSCs and EVSPs to really recognize this complete delivery as far as the customer is concerned. If the end operator is comfortable with using these new gadgets, and then they will be the best advocates for all of us to go out and talk about this. So I think uptime for chargers is very, very important, and workforce development, the different verticals within that, obviously we need to grow. And I think that is something in the near term that we can all work together to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. You made a really important point about assessing the operations of the fleet in that decision between electricity and hydrogen. Does anybody have any recommendations about, or can point fleets to tools that help them make those decisions? And Aria, do you, Eddie?
Thanks, Annalise. So, we have different fleets. We have the yard trucks. We have about 1,000 trucks that, if they operate one day in California, would be captured by the ACF. Of the 1,000 trucks, those are all four-wheel drive. They work long hours. So I would say anyone who's looking at this needs to do what the other people have spoken about, which is to assess the duty cycle. It's not distance that's the only factor. It's the power demand during the day. You have a lot of vehicles that only go 50 or 100 miles. So if you look at range only, you would think, oh, sure, no problem, batteries. But if you only go 50 to 100 miles, but you're working 12 to 16 up to 24 hours a day, and you need power for that entire time, there is no battery technology today that's going to work, especially if you don't have public fueling. 10, 15 years from now, if we get to solid state, that may change. But right now, that isn't the case, especially if those trucks are four-wheel drive, which our trucks are. And I know I won't speak for the other people on the panel and elsewhere, but I know people I've spoken to that are in the utilities and other providers of essential public service. Almost all their service vehicles are four-wheel drive and are out on unpaved areas. So again, you need to, other panelists have said this, you need to assess the different vehicles and the different use and duty cycle of the vehicles and equipment you own to see what technology will work best for you. We found that vehicles and equipment that's captive to a yard, as our friends from San Diego Airport and others have said, that works well with battery electric charging. The trucks seem to work well. The other equipment seems to work well. We're having some problems with the chargers. I just put in the chat, we're gonna probably test an inductive charging solution next time to eliminate that plug. But when you get outside the facility and you have these high power demands over long hours during the day, it's probably going to be something besides battery technology today. Again, 10, 15 years, we may see different battery technology that allows us to run 24 hours.
Thanks. Aria, can you help me with the order?
Yeah.
Of things?
Next up, we have Kashav Sandhi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Just to elaborate and give a different flavor to return to base. We heard about return to base. I think it's a great, the captive fleet, but there's a different flavor for that as well. So US Foods, we're a large food distributor in the state. We have 8 large DCs, but we also have 50 plus drop yards. So out of the DCs, we can, electrification is good feasibility. 80% of the trucks could be battery electric, given the capability today and the miles we drive. So duty cycle, about 80% could be battery electric. But also when we talk about return to base, the other flavor of return to base is we do have those drop yards. In order to eliminate stem miles, again, 8 large refrigerated DCs, they are serving the entire state. You can't have 20 large refrigerated DCs. To eliminate those stem miles, we do have those 50 plus remote yards. Those are typically a parking lot. In our facilities, we could electrify, we could add all the infrastructure, but 30% of those trucks, they are operating out of those remote yards. So when we talk about return to base, they are returning to base, but it's a very different flavor of that base. In those applications, whether it's retail fueling, retail charging, or maybe hydrogen, that might be a different flavor. Those, to electrify those becomes a challenge. So I wanted to add that to, well, because there's a lot of discussion about return to base, but there is a different flavor for that return to base as well. And it's done with the intent of reducing miles. We don't want to be driving stem miles all the time. So that's another challenge we need to solve for. That's where hydrogen and perhaps retail fueling will be key and critical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kashab. Next up, we have Joanne Golden. Joanne.
All right, thank you so much. So Joanne Golden, I'm Senior Vice President of Programs at Gladstein Nandros and Associates, or GNA. And I actually want to give a couple of examples to hit home some of the points that Eddie has brought up, but on behalf of Penske Truck Leasing. And so Penske Truck Leasing has set up a variety of different charging infrastructure locations as part of their operations within California, and was part of the early demonstration projects, not only with Volvo Lights, but also with the Daimler Innovation Fleet and a variety of other products as well. And one of the things that I think keeps them up at night and also keeps us up at night as being an entity that helps support them and figuring all this stuff out is they have had a lot of challenges just with the reliability of these chargers and trying to pinpoint what is causing the issue. And one of the items that I think, Leslie, you were trying to transition into is, how do we start thinking about these things as public sites, right? How do we get into a little bit more of a public site scenario? And already with a very controlled set of vehicles, the number of issues have just been so significant. I mean, Penske's had to dedicate full-time staff just to be able to do testing. And so all of a sudden you do a public site and you're introducing a lot of different vehicles, right? And needing to have that sort of handshake happen between the vehicle and the infrastructure. And all of a sudden those issues are just like, oh my gosh, there's just so many. Where do you even go to be able to pinpoint what those problems look like? And so some of the issues that we have seen just on this reliability handshake sort of item is anytime the vehicle gets an update, anytime the charger gets an update, any of these types of things could trigger the charger not working with that vehicle for whatever reason. We've had issues where the connectivity within the infrastructure itself, the hardware, is just not working. We've had issues where all of a sudden the network is down for, undetermined reasons, and we can't quite figure out why. I will say on a couple of these things, Penske's been working really hard to understand where are all these different instances happening and what can we do to be able to address those. But in large part, much of the charging infrastructure that was developed and kind of adapted. And one of the comments that was in here was, what kind of vehicles are we talking about? It's class 6 through 8 trucks, in large part that we're talking about in this type of an instance. And in those instances, it's been a really big challenge to be able to make sure various manufacturers are testing against the various charging equipment and understanding whose responsibility it is to make sure that that is actually taking place. And so when we're talking about how do we start doing public sites, which I'm really excited about, and I know a couple are going to be coming online here shortly for EV charging, you start asking, well, do you start running into even bigger challenges in terms of making sure that there's going to be access and reliable access to those chargers? And I think that that is a big concern. But the other thing that I want to mention that I've really seen some of the EV charging providers, and especially on the service side, so the different network service providers that are out there, they've started to take this more seriously and have set up labs to do this type of testing. And so when we're thinking about timing of how do we deploy all of these things, none of this happens overnight. It takes a while to get the vehicles. It takes a significant amount of time to get the charging infrastructure. But on top of that, doing this testing alone is a very, very significant step. And it's an important one to make sure that when you get the vehicles and you get the chargers, that they actually talk to each other and that they can actually work. And the more models come into the picture, and not just on the vehicle side, but also the charging side, the bigger this issue actually becomes.
Thank you, Joanne. Next up, we have Ava from RCWD, excuse me.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to speak on this issue. I'm with Rancho California Water District, and we are a medium-sized water provider in southwestern Riverside County. And, you know, we have 4 charging stations for our staff use. We do not have any electric vehicles. So when listening to this conversation, as a small, medium-sized utility, and keep in mind, there's about 400 medium to large-sized water utilities in the state, and there's probably about 3,000 small water utilities, which is, they probably have 15, 20 trucks or fewer. So there's quite a few of us, and we're entering this, and the conversation I heard for the last hour is really worrisome to me, because we are water providers. We have, this is not our technology. So, but we need to be able to respond immediately. And you know, water and sanitation is what we provide. If we have a failure of that, we can have people out of water, people sick, you know, people dying. So for us, this is critical. To give you an example, last night, half my fleet was out more than 24 hours. The fleet was parked. We were rotating employees because we had 2 massive failures in our system. So when I hear that the technology is not quite there, that the charging infrastructure has failures, that's a risk I can't accept for our industry. It's really, really scary. When I'm asked to say, hey, you know, we want to implement decarbonization and we want to implement ZEV, but we can guarantee the performance. You know, you ask what keeps me up at night, you know, initially was water affordability. Now I'm thinking, hey, being able to actually supply the water to the customer if I have a fleet that is not reliable. So when we talk about infrastructure, we really need to focus not only on making sure that's reliable, but it's also affordable, because when we look at infrastructure, I live off rates. I don't have a product to sell. I can't raise the product rate. If I have to raise water rates, that affects low-income customers. That affects the affordability aspect. That has so many different aspects that our legislature is currently working on, that we really need to very carefully think about how we implement the ZEV rules. We're all for it. We want to be part of it. If the conversation is between hydrogen and electric, you know, for us, it's the technology. Is the technology available? I heard a speaker say that, hey, you know, we have run times and duty cycles. That's all we live on. If the technology cannot provide a duty cycle, we are unable to provide service. You know, if there's anything that we can do, not only to enhance and strengthen the infrastructure, but provide training. You're going to have 3,000 water providers that have no clue. They'll be told there's a regulation coming in, and they don't have the expertise. They can't commit staff to this, and all of a sudden they're hit, and they're like, "Well, what do we do with this?" So that's my tremendous concern when we're talking about infrastructure and bringing this on. So I really appreciate you letting me speak, and you know, this is a very good conversation, and I'll continue to listen. Thank you.
I'm going to dive in and ask, given the direction that the conversation is going around reliability, if we have any EVSC providers that would like to chime in and talk about what their experience has been, what they're doing to try and address this. Keshav?
So yeah, I had quite a bit concerns about reliability, interoperability, and Lisa, she mentioned about not many issues with the AC charging. So having been a part of the industry for about 15 or plus years, AC was a big issue in 2010. We're all used to J1772 being reliable, interoperability, not a problem, I go plug it in. But to those who have been doing for about 15, 20 years, that was a big challenge. So from my perspective, I would say, and Rustam is on the call as well, the DC fast charging and even more so the MCS, it is still evolving, and I think it'll evolve at a much faster pace. I don't think that will be a major issue going forward, because for the folks like us who have been doing it, J1772 was a major obstacle even about 12 years ago. Brand A truck could not charge with, it's a standard, but there are nuances within the standard as well. So this interoperability and reliability, I believe it's probably not going to be the major constraint going forward. That's just based upon the experience that we had. The AC charging was an issue, but the likes of Lisa are saying it's not an issue. But the DC charging, it's evolving, and we believe it will in the next couple of years. Reliability and interoperability will improve.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to call on Ben from Hyundai.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak here. So Hyundai is relatively agnostic, so we are doing both battery and fuel cell electric, but I think that this whole conversation right now is not really held at an eye level, because we have seen many OEMs now deploying battery electric heavy duty trucks, for example, but we did not see many OEMs bringing in fuel cell solutions to market. And I believe that we have to, and in all fairness, hydrogen refueling stations have also not been 100% reliable all the time. There have been issues with compressors, with liquid pumps, and so on and so forth. So we see this also as a potential issue. But what I can tell you from my experience talking to customers is that we get questions like, can we use your fuel cell truck to recharge? Can we take off power and recharge our battery electric trucks with those in case we have a grid failure or other issues? So that's a real question that we are getting. And that shows you already that this resiliency issue is already in the minds of many, many customers. And what we believe, at least at Hyundai, is that hydrogen does not only play a role in transportation, but also to help to decarbonize building heat and power, energy-hungry industries like steel milling, aluminum, and other industries. It can be used for electric trams and other types of transportation. So I think we should take a more holistic view. We should look at the big picture. What does California want to do? What kind of industries and sectors you want to decarbonize? And I think then there is no other valid solution than hydrogen. And if you then have a lot of hydrogen available already, and there are many companies investing now into production capabilities, as you know, then it makes absolute sense to use that also as a fuel for propulsion for trucks and transit buses when it's already readily available. Why would you then invest billions and billions of dollars into enhancing the grid capacities? A grid that is already on the brink of collapse during summer months when you have to shut it down because of fire hazards and other things. So that's just what our consideration is. And we are now doing a technology demo in California, and we try to invite many people to come over and to check out our vehicles and get a first understanding that we are farther ahead with fuel cell trucks than many might believe. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. So we have time for one more before we move on to the next topic. Rustam Kocher, can you go ahead and unmute your mic? We cannot hear you. Still cannot hear you.
Do we want to try and provide him with a call-in number, and then we can come back to him as part of our next?
Yeah. Okay. Annalisa, would you like to move on to the next topic, and then
Sure.
when I get him his call-in number, he can comment?
Yeah, and I want to apologize if I'm moving on while we still have some hands raised. I think we're starting to kind of morph into the next session as we're starting to hear about how we make the choice between having on-site fueling, whether we're relying on off-site fueling, or whether we want to be subscribing to fueling as a service, either on-site or off-site, or a mix of the two. And here we're interested in comments and questions around how you make that decision, what opportunities and pros and cons there are to any of these options. What we've got here is sort of the distinction between hosting your own fueling that is dedicated to your fleet versus relying on infrastructure which is provided offsite, versus more of a morphed hybrid of the two, which is having an on-site fueling facility, but you're contracting for that as a service, and maybe coupling that with off-site fueling as well. Do we have folks that would like to talk on that? I'm going to start with folks that have been new to the conversation. Aria, do you have an order?
Yeah. First up, we have Matt. We have Matt from Forum Mobility.
Oh dear, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you. It is also a phone issue, it looks like.
Oh shoot.
Okay. Matt, I will send you the call-in number.
Looks like he's connecting to audio.
Okay.
Let's see if it's.
How's that?
Yes.
So much better.
Okay, I just hung up my phone. I'm Matt Ledoux. Forum Mobility, we're a very recently funded startup. We were just actually went public with our funding a few weeks ago. That included Edison International, SCE's parent company, and we're focused on infrastructure for drayage specifically. And we've done a lot of analysis and really third-party, drayage fueling stations. And there's a big part of it that I think, there's just no way that you can do it all on site. Not only because I think, we see the duty cycles needing, and Tony could probably attest to this, 350 to 500 kW charging rates are really, would be incredibly helpful for drayage vehicles to do opportunity charging in the middle of the day. But when you take the independent operator network into account in drayage, I mean, TTSI, I'm sure has a good amount of trucks. 75% of the drayage trucks on the road are independent operators. There's just no way that they're going to be able to charge at home. There's going to need to be, a pretty comprehensive solution built, for the large fleet owners like a TTSI, but also for, the Matt Ledoux truckings in Modesto, California. So when you think about the thousands and thousands of drayage trucks and the fact that 75% of them are independent operators, there's really nothing around the fact that you're going to have kind of offsite centralized charging throughout a lot of these corridors. So.
Thank you. Who do we have up next?
Next up, we have Chris Shimoda from California Trucking Association. Chris, you can go ahead and unmute your mic.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I think Keshav touched on this a bit, just as far as the decision on where you're going to site the charging infrastructure is largely about how you're going to use the vehicle. And I'm just going to expand upon that in a couple of ways. So, when you're going through your assessment, I mean, the simplest decision is if you have a return to home base, 8 to 10 hours to charge, you can put all of your vehicles in a location on much lower capacity chargers. That's a pretty simple choice, especially if it's a facility that you own and you don't need to work with a landlord, or there's no other considerations when you're putting that energy into the building. But there are a lot of variables within that decision-making that are going to play into whether or not you are going to be able to depot charge, or if you're going to be relying on a public, shared, or retail network. I forgot who just spoke. I think it was Matt, touched on another one. You may not have a depot. An independent contractor, for instance, is largely either going to be parking in a public parking facility at their own home. You're not necessarily going to be able to bring in charging into that location. At that point, and I just want to sort of inject the data point that even outside of the ports, truck fleets of 3 or fewer are 50% of the entire fleet in the state of California. So we're talking about a fairly significant population that in all likelihood is not going to have a depot, to bring in customer-sided charging. And so, some of the other considerations here are, do you have that 8 to 10 hours to charge overnight? Let's call it a less than overnight, but greater than an hour sort of expectation, or are you expecting to get a 15 to 30 minute fill or charge? Ownership of the land. Do you own the facility and the land? Is it leased? Are you looking at doing an off-site shared charging facility? Are you on a parking facility that you do bring trucks in overnight, but it's a temporarily entitled lot? We're hearing that a lot within our drayage members that, yeah, we've got a parking facility, but it's temporary. We don't own it, and the landowner may decide to move on and develop that land tomorrow, and so they're not necessarily going to be keen on investing multiple millions of dollars into the charging infrastructure to permanently entitle that space. We've also heard to the individual location, is there the grid capacity or not to electrify that particular facility? Especially in the early days, most of the infrastructure deployments have been at locations where there are adequate amounts of power at that address to do the project without involving utility side upgrades. That's another consideration. And then even where everything comes together, we've also had instances where for instance, we had a member who was looking at doing a 10 truck deployment who ended up finding out that their roof space would not accommodate the solar that they wanted to do as part of the project. And so they were in a position where they were going to have to acquire additional land offsite. And so it's a fairly complicated calculus once you move outside of that very ideal situation of customer-sided overnight owned land. You start getting into a lot of variables. So just something kind of at a high level to start the discussion.
Thanks. And if anybody in their comments has some thoughts about how offsite and fueling as a service work, feel free to work those into your comments. Who do we have up next, Aria?
So we have Aravind from the Volvo Group.
Hey, thanks again, Aria. Yeah, I really echo what Chris just brought up. So the one thing that I would add on top of that is, what we're hearing from the fleets is some of these guys who own their sites or who have long-term leases, they're motivated to go beyond the deployment of chargers. They're looking to upgrade some of their warehousing equipment. They're looking to put battery storage, on-site energy generation, think solar panels and such. That's an extra layer of motivation. So if someone has site ownership or long-term plans, and if they're thinking about these things, again, thanks to state grants and other means, I think that's a huge motivator, because then they have better control in terms of the energy usage and the energy costs. And they're always looking at it as to how it meets the bottom line. Now, going back to offsite charging, one of the concerns that we are hearing from the fleets is, well, where's it going to be, right? So I kind of mentioned early on, it's going to be a real estate play. It's not so much where my trucks go, it's where my electric trucks are going to go. And, is it really going to add that extra mile or extra few miles where it'll help me get closer or achieve some sort of a parity with my diesel truck operations. I mean, that's a little bit of their thought process. The huge concern again here, and I think Joanne raised this and I raised this earlier, is will I get a guaranteed charger when I pull into a public charging or a public charging site? So, and after many discussions, it's obvious to me that you cannot have a public charging site with just 1 or 2 150 kilowatt chargers, or even a couple of megawatt chargers. I mean, they're looking at having a few chargers. I mean, think of bays of chargers, right? I mean, with some sophistication, maybe a reservation or some such options to make sure that when they go to a publicly accessible charging site that is en route, you are guaranteed. So they pull in, spend maybe 30, 40 minutes to top off, and then they get out. So I think those are some considerations that we all need to be having when we're thinking about public charging sites to support medium duty, heavy duty electric vehicles. And I think the other unknown that I've heard is how much is it going to cost if I go and use a public charging public charger? Because if it's on site, it's closer. I have some sense of assurance in terms of, you know, I'll have access to the charger when I want. And then, as I mentioned, if there's other means to offset the energy consumption by generating energy on site, you have a way to estimate and control your TCO, which is still unknown at this point for the fleets who are taking on these trucks. So there's all those factors that I just want to put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, and welcome back, Rustam.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Switched audio sources. Apologies for the problems. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rustam Kocher. I'm joining this California discussion from Oregon today because I actually play in your backyard just a little bit. So a couple of concerns that were brought up, I think we're well positioned to address. So if you've been following my images, I've been sharing some things that we're working on as an industry. One has been referenced, which is the megawatt charging system, or NCS. It's been an industry effort to define a fast charging connector that will be able to rapidly charge large format batteries, whether they roll, float, or fly, with a target of about 20 minutes. And so that means it has to be able to conduct over 1 megawatt of power safely and securely. And we're very close to being able to say that that is complete from a design perspective and ready to be released. So look for some news on that next year. And I would say every major industry OEM is involved in that process and is contributing to that process. So when we talk about the ability to fast charge electric trucks, that is already well along the way towards completion. The other piece has been public charging. What does public charging look like? Well, it looks like what's behind me here. So there is already in operation today a public charging truck location. It's in Portland, Oregon. It's on Swan Island. It's a partnership between Daimler Trucks and Portland General Electric. And we have hosted a large number of large format vehicles. We can go all the way up to articulated buses. We had over the past weekend a FlixBus that was running a route between Seattle, Portland, Corvallis, and Eugene that was able to successfully pull in and charge and pull back out. Our local municipality uses it to test out their electric buses, and they actually run some routes. And we are working now, there's 16 public utilities up and down the West Coast, from Vancouver, British Columbia to San Diego, California, that are working to make the West Coast Clean Transit Corridor a reality. We've evaluated and dug deeply into 80 separate sites up and down this West Coast corridor. And we're looking for direct partners to partner with as far as the money is concerned. And we are planning to submit a funding request to the federal government for the new infrastructure funding that's coming out that was recently signed into law. So you'll see more noise about that West Coast Clean Transit Corridor, and we want to enable clean fuel to be able to move all the way up and down the West Coast. So hopefully we've got some solutions for you. I know that they're an issue. And one last thing is the interoperability. Again, there's no place to test interoperability of large format vehicles. This place does exist. Again, Electric Island, we have 8 separate chargers. We'll have 2 more from different manufacturers installed here in the next month or so. So we'll have 10 chargers, all from different manufacturers, different types. We're planning on a test event at Roadmap, which is in mid-June in Portland. If you would like to get in line first with your vehicle or charger, hit me up. I'm sure most of you have my email.
Thank you. Up next, we have Zach Thompson from EBCE.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Zach Thompson with East Bay Community Energy. We are the load serving entity in Alameda County and also for the city of Tracy as well. So we actually generate the electricity, and then PG&E is responsible for the transmission and distribution of that electricity. So obviously, you know, we have a relatively small, I guess, service area and impact, but you know, what I'll talk a bit about what we're doing in that service area, but you know, we sort of agree with what we've heard from the other panelists that this isn't necessarily a this versus that solution discussion. It's more of an all of the above, and how do we advance all of the above, because we know that all these different use cases exist and we'll need different solutions. So what we've done in our service area is we have DMV registration data. So we've mapped out all of the medium and heavy duty vehicles in our service area. And you know, what we've seen is that they're all over the place, right? And this sort of goes to that point of the independent operators. We've heard a couple different people mention, you know, the percentage of vehicles out there that are owned by independent operators, right? So these are sort of one and two off vehicle owners, right? So they don't necessarily, they're not going to have a domicile location, right, to charge these vehicles when they're not in use. So some things that we've done, you know, we've also mapped out all of like the goods movement sector businesses that are within our service area, and third-party logistics providers and things like that. So we've begun talking to those fleet operators about whether or not it would make sense to have domicile charging at their facilities. Talking to the third-party logistics providers about whether or not it makes sense to provide some opportunity charging to the fleets that they serve at those locations. And then, you know, the other thing that we're really looking into is developing the common fast charging yards or public charging yards, you know, to serve those different use cases, and particularly the independent operators that don't have domicile locations. So some things that we're doing in that field is we're also talking to the wholesale petroleum providers in our service area. So that's, you know, where these trucks are probably currently fueling throughout the day, and talking to them about, you know, deploying some public fast charging opportunities there. And then we also have a grant with the EPA where we're assessing brownfields throughout our service area for the potential of redeveloping those, cleaning those up, redeveloping them as common fast charging yards for both light duty, but also on the medium and heavy duty side of things as well. So, you know, we know that this is going to require a number of different solutions, and so we're trying to talk to our different fleet operators about what those solutions could look like, and particularly in our service area, and how we as the load serving entity can help.
That's really helpful. Thank you. We had a question in the chat that I wanted to pose to Tyson. The question was about how to share connections with consultants that might be able to help fleets figure out their infrastructure needs. Tyson, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're just kind of batting that around too, so we can figure out a way. Maybe we can create a list. We're talking about maybe posting on the website. We got to figure out what makes sense, but perhaps if people want to do any hand raising, not today, but we can email us at zev@gobiz.ca.gov if you're, you know, specialize in that, or have someone you've worked with, and then we can create a shared list that, you know, we won't endorse anybody over another, but certainly it's helpful to have a list of people who specialize in ZEV infrastructure and helping fleets succeed.
Thanks. Who do we have up next?
Next up, we have James Dumont from Momentum.
Hey, good morning, everybody. James Dumont, Momentum. We're based in Sacramento. We work across California and the United States. Because everybody's really focused so far on the electric side, I'd like to talk on the hydrogen side. When we look at captive fleets, trying to get hydrogen deployed, especially in renewable or clean hydrogen, the cost is exorbitant currently, and delivery is one of the largest functions of that. When we look at the ports in particular, we have limited real estate and some of the most expensive real estate in the nation at the ports, and trying to deliver liquefied hydrogen, which is most economical, you will have to then have a system for converting that into gaseous hydrogen, which takes up a lot of real estate, has exorbitant costs with that. Sorry, maybe not exorbitant the right word. But what I'd like to say is currently the fire code prevents distributing hydrogen in a mobile refueler beyond more than a few kilograms, which means you can't even fully fill up a new piece of zero emission hydrogen fuel cell cargo handling equipment on a single load, which means you have to have a dedicated driver to fill up one piece of equipment. So we need to have updates on ability to deliver these alternative fuels economically by enabling new policies and new codes. And that will require updates across the state and local fire codes as well as international. And then beyond that, talking to Rustin's point on having these West Coast Clean Transit Corridor Initiative, we did apply to the RAISE grant with support from San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District and Travel Centers of America. So that ball is rolling forward. We were not awarded, unfortunately, but that conversation is moving quickly, and there is a lot of interest throughout the state, and we're continuing to try to move that ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Up next, we have Jack Symington from Lacey.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Yeah, my name is Jack Symington. I'm a program manager for transportation at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. And we do a lot of work when it comes to infrastructure planning, especially in the drayage space. So some of my comments might be a little more directed in that area. But I did want to touch on the public versus private versus kind of dedicated and shared. It really is a land use question and a real estate question. There is no getting around that. And when thinking about what kind of the business opportunities are at those different kind of locations, Chris hit on it. The private depots with kind of dedicated fleets with return to base operations and overnight charging is certainly the easiest. And when the fleet owns that property, it becomes even easier. But it is going to be difficult if the property isn't owned, and that's the case for a lot of drivers. And so this is really an opportunity for those landlords and those industrial park property owners to get involved in this space, especially down in Southern California with the South Coast AQMD's indirect source rule. This should really spur investment from those industrial park owners to make the investments in infrastructure that are needed to support their tenants. Really, it can become table stakes for a lease eventually. What that business model looks like if it's infrastructure owned by those property owners, or maybe they're partnering with an energy service provider. I still think there's a good opportunity for some experimentation on what that exact business model is and how the utility, the property owner and any energy service provider are interacting. But that shared access model is going to be key. And then on the public side, I won't spend too much time on that. I think the development of the megawatt charging and kind of the corridor development is going to be important, as well as having ample charging down by the ports as well. That certainly is expensive real estate. There's no denying that. But the city governments and the municipalities that can make a public investment in that public infrastructure. That's what it's going to take to show fleets that there is, provide them confidence rather that there will be charging available. And again, there will be the opportunity for startups and other companies to figure out the reservation system, like Ervin mentioned, that's going to be necessary. All trucks need to be able to pull up and charge when they need to. There needs to be the availability. So you're going to see that develop on the public side as well. Yeah, that's thank you for the time.
Thank you. We're in a bit of a lightning round to stay on time. So with the remaining folks that we call on this subject, if we could go relatively quickly. Then we're going to move into site control and property considerations, which we're already starting to step into. So I think it's going to be a natural progression into the next topic. Aria, who do we have up next?
With that, Lisa, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Hi, I'm here. This is Lisa, San Diego Airport Parking Company. Well, what I would have about public charging versus charging. We've done a lot of both. I've been doing that also, helping other fleets as I run into a different role that I'm involved in green power. But you know, this on-site charging obviously makes it extremely easy. The one thing that I've discovered with the public charging that makes a concern for me is it certainly provides a great opportunity, but we've got some crazy rates. We've got on average DC charging between 40 cents a kilowatt hour and AC charging 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Substantially, that's about 50% more expensive than what you're seeing that a site could actually deploy. I think if we could come up with a solution where we're incentivizing hubs that are existing from having the real estate, you know, all of us are competitive, but we're friendly competitors. And I think when we're in a region, I think if we could provide an incentive for utilization to be set by certain periods of time for those existing fleets, is something that I see at San Diego Airport Parking Company is very viable for us. We've got probably 6,000 miles a day of infrastructure, and we only use about 1,000 miles a day. You know, of course, we're not, you know, able to just do it whenever we can do it. But, you know, my point is to make sure that we do know about what is, and I think that leaves other opportunities. I think as far as plug charging length at public stations is an issue for large vehicles, the parking space, filters for knowing what you're pulling in before you get there. There are no filters online between if you're in a garage, not in a garage. If that length would provide you ability to get in and out. And also there is no filter for understanding sometimes the specific manufacturer. We do have interoperability issues. We do know what manufacturers work and what don't. That becomes another issue. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to clean some of this up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up, we have Jamie Levin. Jamie, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again. I want to emphasize how important it is to understand the end user, whether it's a fleet operator or an independent trucker. If we don't understand where they're coming from, what their needs are, and their total cost of ownership, we're proposing technology advances that will drive them either out of business or we will never realize the goals that we set in place. CTE, our organization, has been spending a fair amount of time with transit fleets, modeling their duty cycles, looking at their needs in order to then apply the available technologies to meet their needs in a more affordable fashion. We're also working with utilities, you know, non-transit fleets. The lady from the utility that spoke earlier, I believe her name is Eva, she brings up a really important concern about how are they going to function as we move towards these new technologies and the availability of fuel. And so we need to think in terms of what their primary requirements are. We've talked about range, others have talked about energy storage to be able to not necessarily go very far, but to be able to support hotel loads, accessories with enough energy on board that vehicle. That's especially critical for utilities. We have to take into account payload. If we solve these range and energy solutions, but we reduce the payload for freight operators, that will kill their business. We have to address the speed by which they can recharge or refuel their vehicles. And we've got to address total cost of ownership. If I have a perfect solution on the vehicle side, but my cost of fuel is so exorbitant, I can't afford to operate, we've killed the goose that's laid the golden egg, in effect. And the last point I want to make is we need to think about scalability. These technologies can work well at small scale, but as we start expanding to hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, how feasible is our approach to address scalability? This is a big factor, and it plays right back to the question of resiliency and our ability to operate under the worst conditions. But those are important factors that if we don't address those and address them head on, we will not succeed at meeting the goals and the targets that the state of California has established.
Thanks, Jamie. Who do we have up next? And I want to make sure that we're able to move on to our next topic.
Yeah, so next up we have Matt from Forum Mobility.
Yeah, Zach brought up a good point. I mean, just, as he was talking about being an LSE, and, and I think Jamie, dovetailing off of what you're saying about reliability, and I'd be curious, around the PUC and the IOUs, again, we see the 350 to 500 to 1 megawatt, that, the charge rate to being so critical for the use case, especially in drayage, a fast charging capability. I would encourage everybody to go look at load hosting capacity maps, the ICA maps that the IOUs put out, and take a look at how many of those feeders on the distribution system have more than a couple megawatts of capacity on them. And what we'll quickly find is that sites that have the sufficient acreage to accommodate heavy duty fleets that are also on lines that have sufficient capacity that can accommodate this, the faster charging, there's going to be a massive need. I mean, I think Elizabeth, you brought up the 157,000 chargers. A good amount of those are going to need to be incredibly fast chargers. And from the PUC and the IOU side, they're just, we're going to have to get ahead of it significantly to meet the goals, because that's not an insignificant process to go in and upgrade a substation or a distribution feeder to accommodate, what is ultimately going to need to be 2 to 4 to 5 megawatt, industrial facilities to accommodate not only the fleets, but like we've talked about, the independent operators.
Thanks, Matt. Next up, we have Andrew Papson from SCE. Andrew, I've asked you to unmute your mic. There we go.
Hey everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Having some audio video issues. My camera will turn on in it. I did want to thank you for calling out load capacity. We do have a public system. It's called DRPEP, or Dr. PEP. It'll show you the circuit running by your facility and the current load on that circuit and predicted availability over the next 5 years. So that's a fantastic starting tool you use yourself to figure out what the availability is. And I can see my audio is cutting in and out, but
I was about to say, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I'll put a link in the chat and I'll try to get my audio working better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Eddie Phillips.
Thanks, Aria. So I just want to go back to the question of public fueling, and California has over 10,000 public fueling stations. And I want to reiterate the point that the ACF is going to mandate 10% phase in of zero emission trucks by 2027 for the work trucks and other trucks. And if the question is, it's rhetorical, are the fueling stations that we're going to have available by January 1st, 2027 sufficient to meet that need? And are they going to be geographically located in places where the trucks need them? And that's notwithstanding the private fueling that's at a return to base operation, but many trucks do not return to base. And the other question or point, it's rhetorical, is I'm having someone check on this in a chat. Is the Office of the State Fire Marshal going to approve wet hosing of vehicles and equipment in public spaces? Someone, I think from the port, said that they're limited on wet hosing, but to my knowledge, the Office of the State Fire Marshal is opposed to any type of flammable substance being fueled in a public space. They even passed a bill a couple years ago because there was a model going around where you could kind of Uber getting your car fueled up with gas while you were shopping or something, and they shut that down. So someone ought to be looking into that or talking to the OFM, Office of State Fire Marshal. Thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. It looks like we're going to move on to the next topic. Annalisa, do you want to get that kicked off?
Yeah, actually, Leslie. Have we lost Leslie? Oh, there she is. Let's move into the topic of site control and property considerations. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Yes. I think a lot of the discussion is really leading in this direction, so that kind of makes me pretty happy. What we know from our fleets who have built out their charging infrastructure, a lot of the challenges or all of the different considerations that they've had to go through, whether it's charging and all of that. And I know we'll probably be talking a little bit about that in a lot more detail in another session. But I think before we jump into this, I was really interested to hear a little bit more, or if anybody can chime in on one of the comments that Jack Symington raised about using private property, or having perhaps, if there's interest in or the concept of a private landowner offering up their property for use as charging infrastructure, perhaps overnight, so almost as a business. I know that there might be someone from a port that could offer some perspective to this, but if that's, so I'm just teeing up that as maybe put a little bit of thought into it. But other than that, for say one of our larger fleets that has installed charging infrastructure back at their home base, for possibly, I'm talking a lot as opposed to a little, because really we're talking scale up here. So I'm really looking for people to chime in about, charging stations, charging infrastructure for fleets over 20, large fleets, because that's really where the challenges really start getting interesting. And so I see a lot of people raising their hands. So I'd like to hear from folks with that, either that have worked with the landowner from that perspective, or have their own direct experience, or the other topic I brought up of a private property owner possibly thinking about a business case for offering up their property for charging overnight. I'd almost like to start with Joanne. And then Arya, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I do want to give credit to CARB and the Energy Commission, that large regional freight drayage initiative that you put together. One of the things that GNA did when we were working with NFI from the beginning was we reached out to you because we knew space was going to be one of those really, really big issues. And to be honest, if we were going to do a 50 truck deployment, we said, we're going to need to get a whole new piece of property. And so during that phase, one of the things that we worked on with you, from the beginning was figuring out, okay, how do we make sure that we're positioning this in, a good time frame, that it will be CEQA ready, and all those different things will be put in place. And thankfully, throughout that process, things like COVID took place in that scenario, and it gave us a little bit more of a wiggle room from a timing perspective. I think that's the only time I will say thankfully that sort of instance happened. And the reason why is it took about a year to get through that process, right? To go through the process of identifying what are the different pieces of property, to go through and actually start the acquisition side of things, and to really start figuring out what does all of that look like. So this, I think, was one of the comments, and Chris, I know you echoed some sentiments on this too, so I'd be interested in your thoughts, but this is one of the areas that I flagged that I lose sleep at night, and it's timing. That alone took a significant amount of time, and they had their own real estate division to be able to dedicate those resources to it, right? To figure out how do you make all of that happen. A lot of fleets don't have that sort of capacity to go forward and do that. And when you're looking, especially in the Los Angeles region and Inland Empire and those kind of territories, real estate is a tight market. And so all of a sudden you're putting, limited real estate into the equation, combined with just these condensed timelines, and all of those things can make it pretty tough. But one thing I want to kind of circle back to, Leslie, is your comment about how do you possibly make a private site partially public? And this is a topic that I think there's a couple of different state regulations that are going to come into play when you start making those types of sites public, that could give fleets a little bit of heartburn when they're starting that process. So things like ADA compliance, and all of a sudden not having to just retrofit, a little bit of a site, but possibly the whole site to be able to allow for ADA compliance. Those types of things don't tend to get triggered when you're like a nice behind the fence sort of private charging environment. So these are types of things that need to be thought of and are in consideration. The other really big one that fleets are grappling with right now has to do with weights and measures. And so all of a sudden that also comes into play when you start making things public, is having weights and measures come in and start evaluating your site and making sure that the equipment is being held. And all of these things take time, they take money, they take resources, and they're not small efforts. And so I think it's important for us to just kind of keep all those pieces in mind. Now, I will say what I am really excited about is that there are a couple of sites that are coming into California, very similar to what Rustam mentioned for Electric Island out in Portland. So things like the Watt EV site that is breaking ground for Bakersfield. That's going to be the first fully accessible public charging truck stop. And so that's a really, really exciting sort of thing for us to get to as an industry, right? To be able to have that type of a resource. So just want to throw a couple of those ideas out there to hopefully tie all those pieces together.
Thank you, Joanne. Next up, we have Janet from CCEEB.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So this is Janet Whittick from State, the California Council. And I will say just as quick background, we work with both utility and energy providers, as well as very large but private fleet owners. So my membership comes at this from a number of different angles. And I want to throw out there, especially on this topic, one of the things that we are trying to develop as a concept is some sort of data sharing ability between the fleet planners and the utilities, but probably also I would think for the hydrogen and public station providers as well, so that people can start to understand where the utilities and hydrogen providers think that they're going to have capacity. So as an example, if a fleet has multiple depots and they need to figure out which they're going to move first, it may make sense for them to locate where they know that the grid has capacity and that they're not going to get held up waiting for, different grid upgrades in order to support them. And this is really important from the scaling point of view. Right now, all of our examples to date, which are really important ones, they're demonstrations and pilots. And when you move the entire state system into these technologies, and all the fleets are going to be competing with each other at once to get projects done and on time, it's looking a little bit daunting. So having that safe data information sharing is really, really critical. And we're trying to figure out how we house this. Can the agencies provide support on it? I think right now CEC and CARB have a lot of the data separately in different data systems. Can we use that as a basis to kind of move forward? So I want to plant that seed with everybody here, because it would be such an important and almost simple thing to help facilitate the individual fleets and utility planning cycles. The other thing I want to step back and kind of ask this of the group, and it doesn't need an answer right now, but we're hearing all of the challenges and uncertainty around the infrastructure siting and project development, both on the public and the depot side of it. And my question really is then, what does this mean then for the rulemaking timelines and schedules in advanced clean fleets? Right now, there is flexibility given based on commercial availability and work being done to match that up to the fleet needs and duty cycles, but there's nothing on the infrastructure side. And so we're getting into a position where the fleets are going to have to purchase these vehicles to come into compliance with CARB. If there's no supporting infrastructure, as one person put it, is it yard art? Are these automatically stranded assets right out the gate? And while, I think you're hearing too, a lot of the fleets and facilities are earnestly trying to solve these challenges and get the projects done in time. There has to be some space made for good actors who are going to hit these hurdles. Right now, the rule itself has none of that flexibility. So again, thanks for the time and thank you for letting me participate today.
Thank you, Janet. Next up, we have Mike Tunnell from ATA.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, well, thank you very much for holding this. And, I just kind of wanted to talk about the spatial aspects a little bit of this. If from a public feeling perspective, if you think about trucks pulling in truck stops today, it may be a 15-minute process to onboard the fuel in that truck. And obviously it's a very large vehicle. We see trucks parked all over the state because of the shortage of space currently. And if you think about bringing on board fuel and electric and hydrogen, the timelines involved there, obviously electricity is substantially a longer timeline, longer dwell time to fuel that vehicle. So the spatial requirements that we have today, which are unfulfilled in some ways, will only get multiplied as we move into the electric side. And the hydrogen has potential, although the pricing is very difficult. So I think you really need to, as you look into this question of public versus private, you really need to look at one, the spatial aspect, and then I'll echo the earlier comments about just the whole bringing private property into a public realm. You have maintenance, you have restrooms, you have all the issues that you need to look at into doing that. And we've had a shortage of truck stops in the state currently, and so it hasn't been filling the need, it hasn't met the demand to date. So it's definitely a complex issue that needs to be looked at more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next up, we have Chris Shimoda from California Trucking Association.
Great, thank you. And Leslie, just to get to your questions really quick. So retail developers do exist. We've had some discussions with at least one such station developer. You're probably looking at somewhere between a 2 to 3 megawatt station, 10 to 20 chargers max. Going to be a very large capital investment on behalf of that station developer. They are still looking to develop their business model, how they're going to make money. I've heard that LCFS capacity credits are going to be key on the commercial station development side. Large scale fleet deployments, it really depends on the charging speeds and the size of vehicles as far as how difficult that's going to be. You can get a lot of 19 kilowatt chargers in a location before you run into problems. But I think that there's very little experience doing large scale deployments of 250 to 350 kilowatt chargers. It's going to be a different ball game when you try to get, let's say, 20, 30 vehicles charged at that capacity in a location. But specific to the topic of site control and space considerations, I dropped this into the chat for Jack, but just wanted to reemphasize that we've heard from even our largest members, we're talking like top 10 for hire fleets in the country, that they lease their locations in the state of California rather than own. These are typically going to be shorter term leases. So not like, I see Thomas with his hands raised, not the 30-year terminal lease at the port. It's going to be more in the range of like a 5 to 7 year lease. And there is going to be a negotiation that goes on between the tenant and the landowner about who pays for the upgrades, how it plays into future lease renegotiations and renewals. If the value of the land increases and suddenly the lease rates go up, there's all sorts of business considerations that will occur at that point in time. And I'll just use kind of a real world thing that has come up in previous deployments for TRU infrastructure, where on the trucking side, customers change quite frequently and your business needs change quite frequently. This was a specific example in Sacramento where a refrigerated facility where some charging infrastructure had gone in, that particular customer went out of business. The facility was then converted to a dry facility. You can think of situations where a trucking company may have a specific customer who moves their business, where that particular facility was upgraded to service just that customer. The tenant then needs to leave. The landowner is going to be stuck with a fairly expensive, sort of custom built piece of electric charging infrastructure. So these are just, sort of real world considerations on the business side that are going to come into play, because, we're not talking about on the light duty side, residential charging. It's sort of like the apartment charging issue on steroids on the commercial side because of the, lack of ownership and transient nature of these facilities. And then on the space consideration side, I already raised the, sort of site specific space restraints, but I did want to also just quickly highlight that we do have a macro level space question that I think we need to look into, where if you look at the Energy Commission's work on the necessary number of chargers, I think that was great work that they've done, based on sort of assumed number of 50 kilowatt and 350 kilowatt chargers that need to be deployed. I would encourage folks to take a look at the Port of Long Beach's recent charging infrastructure study, which I think is very revealing, where what they did was the Port of Long Beach looked at potential available space that they own, which could be converted into charging infrastructure. This was previous to, a lot of this land being used as empty container storage right now, but that's beside the point. What the Port of Long Beach found was that they could potentially bring on about 22 megawatts worth of charging capacity if they utilized all of the available land at their disposal for charging. Whereas if you look at the overall demand just for the drayage fleet in Southern California, you're talking about at or above a gigawatt worth of demand potentially, something on the order of like 400 charging sites that need to be developed. And so space considerations should also be, what are the space considerations? If we're talking about a, fairly large build out of retail or public charging, is that space actually available to make it happen? And, in the best study that's been done on the drayage side, I think it's pretty questionable that we can meet that demand. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Up next, we're going to call on Noelani Derrickson. Noelani, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, folks. Thanks for this great call today. Noelani Derrickson calling from Tesla. As some might know, Tesla is manufacturing the Tesla Semi. It's a Class 8 electric semi truck with up to 500 miles of range and capable of fast charging. Wanted to make a couple comments on the MCS that Rustam flagged earlier. Tesla's been working closely with a majority of the electric, medium, and heavy duty industry through a group called Charin to develop the megawatt charging standard, or MCS as it's being called. It's still currently being fine-tuned by the industry, as Rustam flagged, but I wanted to mention that Tesla is already installing a version of the MCS chargers at a number of different locations today. So there's progress that is being made right now, which is very exciting. On reliability, which was flagged earlier, absolutely agree that customer experience and reliability is paramount. Tesla has built about 60% of the public fast charging for light duty vehicles in California. So we have some experience there. And in terms of uptime, the chances of not being able to charge at any of our public fast charging locations at any given time are close to zero. So very high uptime. And I don't want to dismiss the experiences of some fleets that they've had with unreliable infrastructure and initial pilots, but L2, level 2, and DC fast charging in California is not new. We have lots of years of experience, and there is technology available and proven that provides high levels of reliability. And then on the redundancy piece, that's absolutely important as well. And for medium and heavy duty fleets, one option could be pairing overnight charging with MCS with that quick charging, which could be helpful for providing backup. And then on siting, yes, great questions and discussion so far on this. I think as similar with light duty DC fast charging stations, reducing the timelines for permitting and utility design and connection, those components will be really essential. Those are major soft costs that still exist for light duty DC fast charging that will be applicable for medium and heavy duty infrastructure. The siting, the development, and the installation process based on everything that we've worked on for medium and heavy duty charging is very similar to light duty fast charging, except that it's strategically located to support fleet needs. So there's a lot of expertise already, both on the charging provider side, the OEM side, the local government side, utilities, on how to actually build these stations. So we can use the experience that we've had over the last several years and apply the light duty learnings to medium and heavy duty fleets and charging. And then, as has been mentioned, proactive planning absolutely will be key. And it's already underway in many jurisdictions, which is great to see. So utilities are doing planning, ports, local governments, and of course the agencies. And I believe the CEC is also currently awarding additional blueprint funding as we speak for medium and heavy duty infrastructure planning. So all of those planning pieces together are going to be essential to make sure that all these siting components can help support these fleets as they electrify. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Thomas from PMSA. Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you. Thomas Yelenich with the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. For those that don't know us, we represent marine terminal operators and ocean carriers that serve California ports. For those who are interested, I put in the chat a link to the Port of Long Beach charging study that Chris Shimoda referenced. Leslie asked the question about, what charging opportunities there might be in places like the ports. And I think a lot of folks think intuitively as a destination for trucks, charging is going to be a great place. The ports are going to be a great place for charging. One of the challenges we have is that terminal operations are not consistent with truck charging. The goal, everything we strive to do within the port complex is move the cargo as quick as we can. When we have congestion, when we have problems like the supply chain crisis we have today, those problems become really manifest. And so when you have charge times with the dwell times that Mike from ATA was discussing, those sort of operations become a challenge to do in the port. And that's, I think, why the Port of Long Beach study is so important. It does identify a handful of parcels within the port outside of marine terminals that are possible locations. As Chris mentioned, that's up to 22 megawatts of power with an estimated need of 1.5 gigawatts of peak power demand when this transition is complete. And the challenge is, where are we going to put these charging? We need this charging now, and I think we need it sooner than most people expect. While most of ACF's proposed deadlines are coming later this decade, the initial requirements affecting port drayage kick in less than 2 years. So if we're to hit the requirements for ACF for port drayage, that infrastructure should already be under construction today. None of it is. And so when we look out into the future, and we'll probably, I'm sure, be talking about this more in the next section of this discussion under permitting, the construction, the permitting, how are we going to have the infrastructure in place just for port drayage to be able to continue to serve these ports when we want to, as proposed, ACF will require that every truck added after November 2023 has to be a zero-emission truck. That's an immense challenge, and I don't see how we get there from where we are today in terms of infrastructure. Thank you.
Thomas, I wanted to ask you a follow-up because
sure.
The notion of having to plug into something in an operation like a port where drayage trucks are all queuing up to get a offload or onload. I know that we have some demonstration projects on wireless. And I also know that wireless charging folks are really building up their capability to do some serious high power charging. So if we look into the future and we set aside the other challenge of bringing the power to the site, have people started to look at or consider the opportunity to use something like a wireless charging platform where, as drayage trucks are in the queue, they could be charging while they're, moving along? I mean,
I think the challenge is that they are moving along. It's not like a warehouse where you pull into a dock and maybe you can make the pad at that loading dock.
There isn't an opportunity while that time that the trucks are actually in queue.
They should always be moving forward. That's what I'm saying. Our goal. So from our perspective, no, because during normal operations, the queue is moving. The trucks are moving into the facility. They're moving throughout the facility, and these are very, very large facilities, on the order of hundreds of acres. So it's not like trucks simply go to a single location and we can always expect the truck to stop over a specific location to receive cargo and be charged at the same time. They move.
I was kind of looking futuristically, thinking that yes, this presents a very, very big challenge if we get some creative minds just to think about it.
There may be one case where if we have more automated facilities in the future, but the state of California has put rules on spending public money that prohibits the use of public funding toward automated terminals in the port complexes. So we have some policies in the state that are inconsistent with some other goals, and that also becomes a challenge for us.
All right. Up next, we have Keshav from US Foods.
Yeah, to the question of making our facilities or our real estate available for retail or other charging, In our case, especially more so in the food distribution, that's very binary. The answer would be no, we'll not be able to. And the reason, a couple of points why that's kind of infeasible for us. One, real estate in itself. Food distribution, food delivery happens entirely, mostly on Class 8 vehicles. And we could have 50 to 150 Class 8 vehicles of our own in one facility. To be able to deliver using those Class 8 vehicles, we probably need somewhere between 20 to 40 megawatt hours on each given day, given the duty cycles. So one, real estate, could we carve that out and make it available for somebody else to use it? No. Two, capacity. Utility capacity becomes a challenge. To be able to get that 40 megawatt hours, and also our dwell time does not coincide with the lowest time of use rates. A lot of cases, the discussion is, yeah, the dwell of all the commercial vehicles happens typically around the lowest utility rates. In food distribution, that's not the case. Most of the trucks are dwelling between 2 and perhaps 9 p.m. So for those couple of reasons, one, we'll have to figure out a means or mechanisms to reduce the energy cost. How do we charge? How do we provide these electrons? In most cases, whether it be SCE, whether PGE, we are dwelling mostly when the rate is the highest. Stationary storage will be a requirement just in case to reduce that. So being able to use those electrons or providing it to somebody else is not going to be feasible in our case. One, real estate. Two, coinciding time of use, lowest time of use with dwell does not happen in food distribution.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Urvi Nagrani from PowerFlex.
Great, thanks for taking my comment. I think the question about utility side constraints is something that is going to be important. And I think one of the things I would love to see policies explicitly allow is coupling that electric vehicle installations for EVSEs with storage and solar, because fundamentally you have two options. You can either build up the interconnection and have all of the grid side upgrades coming from the utility, or you can do site upgrades specific to what the fleet needs and do it on the commercial site themselves. Now, we've seen a great number of sites successfully add solar and storage in a way that makes them fit within the existing interconnection. And that fundamentally lowers the cost of grid side investments, not just for the customer, but also for everybody else in the grid territory and all the ratepayers who contribute to those utility side investments. But that means that the individual site host is having to spend significantly more money on infrastructure and how their site is being used in the upfront capital costs, even if they see lower operating costs in the lifetime of these projects. So given that there is either a ratepayers are going to have to pay for this or the site host is going to have to pay for it. And the incentives are often, if they're coming from the state, they say you can do just the charging, but you can't do these other things. Or they're coming from the utility and say, we must get to upgrade the grid if you want to do this. You end up with projects that are not necessarily happening in the most energy efficient way or in the long-term most cost-effective way because of program side constraints that get built in. So I'd love to see some flexibility in how these programs are designed so that if you're a fleet, you can look at it and say, maybe the best way is in fact a grid side update. And that's going to be true because, you know, this warehouse, we got a 5-year lease, and after we're here, some other company is going to be here and have trucks and they're going to need similar things. So maybe it's in the grid interest to just serve this space. But in other scenarios where it's in the site host's interest to do it, the timelines are going to be faster. We should be allowing these incentive programs to support those types of projects. Because if you think about, for example, a program like Carl Moyer, as soon as you attach solar to a school bus project, it goes from 100% reimbursement down to like 60% reimbursement of the project cost, which is disincentivizing adding renewables on site, even if it's a great site, even if there's solar capacity. And that's something where we know that's a bad idea. We could make a project that is more sustainable, more cost effective for the school, but the program just won't allow it because of the way the capital dollars are spent. So I think that's a consideration that's going to apply both for the public sector, whether you're thinking schools or municipalities, as well as for site hosts, whether you're thinking warehouse districts or, you know, corporate campuses. And I'd love to see that emphasized a little bit more in these programs.
Thank you. I think because we're running up against the scheduled end time of our work group meeting, I'd like to open up now. We had two more topics that we were going to discuss: permitting and benefits to the site host of installing ZEV infrastructure. Maybe we can open up to those topics as well as any others that folks have for this next 20 minutes or so. And I'd like to take 10 minutes at the end to wrap up and try and summarize what we've been hearing today. And I'll also ask all of our contributors to exercise brevity so that we get as many perspectives heard in the remaining time that we have. So Aria, I'll turn it to you to take us through our folks that have their hands raised.
Thank you, Annalisa. Next up, we have Alejandra. Alejandra, I have gone ahead and unmuted your mic.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to well, thank you, everyone. And we're sort of a different, I don't want to say animal, different community. We're at the border. We have 4,000 trucks crossing every day from cross-border trucks. And these are relatively medium-sized fleets, I should say, and a lot of independent operators. And as you may know, there are no electric charging stations in Mexico. In fact, there was a proposal to kind of go backward to fossil fuels in Mexico by the president. So I really think that California and CARB should consider a special program for the border. We have the advantage that our electric grid is not part of Mexico. When I say that, I mean Tijuana. It's actually part of San Diego. So there is an opportunity to do some sort of pilot and create some sort of binational program for electrification. But Mexico, I mean, on its own is not going to do it. It has to be something spearheaded by California, in my mind. So I think it's something that should be considered. Also, as you well know, we have mandated CHP facilities where every single truck coming into Mexico has to go through when they cross the border. So there's certainly an opportunity there for a public electrification station. And to my knowledge, that's not being planned at all. And finally, we just want to say we're extremely concerned about the supply issues. We know that the trucks are not even available, like if we order them today, in terms of the timelines that are being proposed. So I don't know, just full of concerns and how we want to comply, but it's just with the timeline that's being proposed, it doesn't seem viable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Nico. Nico, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So good morning. A few items on the topic of permitting specifically. It's been permitting is a challenging topic for California. California depends on community to community, as also as shown in Tyson's overview. However, there are other states where it goes much faster, like Michigan. It's one rule and it applies throughout the state. So I don't know if that's a model to look at, but something of more that provides more consistency and predictability. It's really what it comes down to would be helpful, especially with the targets and the timelines related to that for the rollout of these trucks. What also happens during the building process, when permitting is basically approved, is that there is maybe a challenge with utilities, whether it be gas or electric for that matter, because utilities are typically have a limited workforce as well. And if there are emergencies such as we saw in the last few years, like large fires or other disasters happening, they have to prioritize that. So any work on infrastructure will be put on hold, and the other thing will be prioritized, or in some cases will also be specific requests being made for instead of keeping things overhead, things are buried, and that takes additional, has an additional impact on the budget. So those are just two items that fall under the permitting side of things. Aside from that, I'm also wondering, when we're discussing all of this, with regards to the need for infrastructure, where does the zero emission idling or the idling reduction regulation fall into this? Because that's also an area that needs infrastructure, whether it be charging or hydrogen or others. And that will also have an impact on how everything comes together. You can make calculations for the fleet, even if it's in the yard. But then if you also need to start charging your reefers, for example, that's added to the complexity of what we're talking about here. So just wanted to bring that up as well. But then the last topic is medium duty trucks. I think so far we've largely focused on heavy duty trucks and infrastructure for that. I may have heard some comments about medium duty, but it's not exactly clear where will these vehicles fuel. Will they, to my understanding, they typically don't fill at the truck stops, but they go to small or maybe larger retail stations, maybe on contract. I don't know exactly how that happens, but that's also something that would be good to get some insights, both from the coordinating state agencies, maybe with CEC as the lead, and what their expectations are for the medium duty space, because I think there are numbers out there for light duty, there are numbers out there for heavy duty, but it's not so clear on the medium duty side of things. And my understanding is they could fill at light duty, but it's not exactly clear what that would mean with regard to capacity and need for a number of stations. So I think I'll leave it with that for the request to keep it brief. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. Next up, we have Harry from NorCal Kenworth. Harry, go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, the outstanding event, and appreciate being part of the panels. We see our role at NorCal Kenworth as a medium and heavy duty truck dealership to be part of that infrastructure support that our customers need to maintain that uptime, and as well as educate and demonstrate the zero emissions technology, both on the hydrogen fuel cell side of the house, as well as on the electric vehicle product offering. We've worked with many of the other panelists, including Jamie from CEC, and then also with Dean from PG&E, and then also Benjamin from Hyundai. And they've been a great resource for us in terms of preparing our facilities to be part of that infrastructure support, as I described it, in terms of both education as well as customer support in terms of repair and maintenance for the vehicles. We've taken the initiative to construct a separate service center for zero emissions. And so we're very familiar with the permitting process and some of the challenges. And it really kind of boils down to both timing and some of the unfamiliarity that the cities or the regions have with these alternative fuels, or I guess alternative power. Specifically, and I think it's been brought up by other panelists about the fire departments and their concern about gas, and we've dealt with it on the natural gas side of the house, because we were one of the first dealerships to support natural gas with both LNG and CNG. So we're very familiar with some of the obstacles with near zero emissions technology. But even with that kind of knowledge, it's difficult to convince or educate. And again, that's why we rely on the resources from CEC and our supplier partners to educate the fire department that we're not bringing in mobile bombs. We're actually bringing in zero emissions technology and doing it in a safe manner. So just a few comments in terms of the permitting process. It's a lot of time and a lot of education. So thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Next up, we have Ray Pingle. Ray, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you very much. This is Ray Pingle from Sierra Club, California. So as we've heard today, there's many large fleets that are going to need a whole lot of power at various locations. And we've heard mentioned the idea of we need to really look at electrical capacity. So the state agencies have started doing some work on this, starting with the CEC. They've done, as we know, some really good modeling with heavy load and other modeling tools to say, you know, how many vehicles do we think, medium heavy duty vehicles do we think we're going to have each year, and how many 50 kilowatt chargers and how many 350 and how many MCS chargers are we going to need, where and when. So that's a good beginning. And then they have another tool called the EDGE tool, which is the EVSE deployment and grid assessment tool. And what that does is it looks at the gap between what are the power requirements in a given section of the electricity grid, what are the power requirements that we're forecasting by year, and then what is the existing capacity available in that grid sector, and do we have a gap or not? And then they can put that together, then take those to share that information with the utilities. The utilities can say, okay, in this area, we've got sufficient capacity, no problem. We'll wait till we get requests for orders. In this area, we've got a little capacity, we can do something. In this area, we're going to need a ton more capacity to support some of these huge fleets with large power needs. And by the way, it might take 3 years or 4 years. We better get started. So I'm just raising that their capacity is a critical factor. In some cases, it can take a few years to get this done. And my question is, kind of where is the CEC, the PUC, and the utilities? How are they working together? Because this is a long lead time thing to start using all this great data and analysis and tools to determine where the gaps are. And then these utilities, when they prepare their integrated resource plans to the PUC, can say, hey, we need to go ahead and start doing some least regrets grid upgrading right now, even before we've actually gotten applications from people. So that's a broad question. I just want to plant a seed to say, this is a long lead time issue that has to be done so that we don't delay this infrastructure, and we need to start working on it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone from CEC or utilities want to jump in? If you're from the CEC or utilities, feel free to just unmute yourself. Hey, Dean, do you want to weigh in on this?
We're having trouble hearing you. Shoot.
All right. I apologize everyone today for all the technical difficulties. Our next raised hand is Mark Roost. Mark, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you very much. So I've been working on a plan for over a year for the Port of Oakland and the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. And I don't have any data. I got data from a research report for those two ports, and I have data from a trucking services concession holder and fleet owner for the Port of Oakland estimates. So basically, what we're looking at doing is doing conversions instead of replacements and financing them so that the people who in small fleet and independent truckers who are from disadvantaged communities a lot are able to afford them, and structuring the financing so that people make their payments based on the savings that they have. So that creates what we called in the solar in the 80s, no net negative cash flow. And so in order to provide the electricity, you're going to need, even if you didn't have solar canopies over the trucks, you still need to be able to buy low and use it, buy the electricity at the lowest rates, which means you need stationary batteries to capture the electricity. But better than buying it from the grid is to get it out of your own solar system and finance that too. You should be able to pay for all of that with the savings over a period of, say, 2 to 7 years, depending on duty cycles and costs and stuff. At the Port of Oakland, the Bill Abudi is trying to get funding to do a trucking services center on the expansion of the Port of Oakland. And he's planning to put in 300 to 400 truck charging, solar powered truck charging spaces on that site. And he also has an easement to the sewage treatment plant to get electricity from methane. So he's also been trying to get the Port of Oakland to allot space for another 300 trucks to be charged. And it turns out that they're concerned about a low value use preempting a new terminal, like another terminal customer. And so the answer to that is simply structure the charging infrastructure so it's movable, or structure it so that they can use it for their own purposes, so that the new terminal holder could use it themselves. And that solves that. Then there's also two spaces under the freeway going east and west, each of which can provide space for 600 trucks to be there for overnight parking. They could be charged from the sewage treatment plant or from the solar on the rest of the port. So we are a ceramic semiconductor materials science application developer and manufacturer. Will be manufacturer. So we will be making batteries in ceramic floor tile factories, which are commodities themselves, and we'll be making batteries that hold on the order of 2 or more kilowatt hours per kilogram of battery weight, which eliminates the issue of payload being cut back in order to do a long haul freight run. They'll also be able to charge very rapidly, which means that opportunity charging on the West Coast Electric Highway system going up I-5 will be, and in other places, will be viable for them to do opportunity charging. It's also worth considering that every trucker doing long haul stuff has to take a 1-hour meal break, and they have to take a 10-hour plus sleep break. So they can charge during their meal breaks, assuming you have fast charging. The way to make the fast charging happen is to put up the solar canopies over the truck stops, and these solar canopies aren't running at 18 or 20 or 24% efficiency. They'll be running at 48% efficiency, which is what our modeling shows. And the inventor I work with actually got a patent for the first multi-junction thin film solar that was designed for volume production in 1983. And he was looking at 22.5% efficiency then, when the rest of the world was at 5 to 7. Now he's figured out how to more than double that, stacking it with a NREL, technology that he licensed in 1993 to make a total of 48% efficiency, which means that we can get, basically, if you cover an entire fleet yard with the spaces between the trucks as well as the trucks and the driveways and everything else, you can come fairly close to powering a short medium haul fleet from sunlight that is captured in our batteries as stationary batteries and loaded into our batteries as traction batteries in the trucks.
Hey,
So
excuse
we're looking
me,
at
Mark,
doing
do you have any comments that are maybe relevant to the permitting topic or
Yeah. There is a lot of work going on around the country about streamlining permitting. And we're planning to be manufacturing the solar thin film and also the structures that support them. The Bosch captive column. I happen to have worked with the inventor for 10 years back in the 70s.
Hey, Mark, I'm sorry, we're really looking to try to get a number of folks in. We really appreciate your input. Maybe we're going to move on to the next.
I have more when you're ready for it.
All right, thank you.
I think we could probably take just one more speaker, and then I want to take a few minutes to summarize some of the key things that have been coming up throughout our morning.
All right, thank you. Last up, we have Aravind from Volvo.
Thank you so much, and I'll keep this very brief. The two things that I want to put on the table is AB 1236 and another bill, I think it's AB 970 that just got recently passed, if I'm not mistaken. So we have the privilege of working with Tyson and his team to add an addendum for the medium duty, heavy duty permitting. And the flag that I wanted to plant here is, even though there are just awesome guidelines for light duty vehicles and now for the medium duty vehicles, it has not been streamlined, right? I mean, you saw from Tyson's presentation, that this process is still ongoing. So I think there is going to be a finite time that is needed to roll this out, harmonize that, to enforce this. 970 puts a time bound on the permitting steps. And that is something, again, it's just signed into law. So I think we're going to have to kind of wait and see how it's going to be enforced and how quickly we're going to see the results of that. So that is going to be two critical pieces when it comes to permitting. We ran into a lot of issues within the Volvo Lights. People were so supportive, but we could see the disparities between some of the guidelines that City of Chino had versus City of Ontario versus the County of San Bernardino, for instance. And then there's also areas, the last point, areas of overlap between inspection and certain things that maybe the city or the permitting agency has to do versus what the utility might want to do. And I think there is some room if we can work together to see what those overlapping areas are and maybe clearly establish who does what and recognize that when a fleet puts in a PO, when the project is starting, to the extent possible, if we can give a time line for when this will be completed, I think the industry is really going to appreciate that a lot. And the last thing, and hopefully we'll pick this up in a future discussion, but I would encourage the utilities and the PUC to also think about what could be similar provisions to make sure that we have support from the utilities and the right entities in terms of committing to delivering this infrastructure project in a timely manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to everyone who's been contributing today. I apologize if we didn't get to unmute your mic again to contribute to each of the topics. Clearly, this is a set of issues that we could talk all day about. And I think this has been very constructive. I wanted to summarize some of the themes that we've been hearing throughout the morning, starting with reliability. Obviously, we're hearing this on the light duty side too, that in the public space, especially, drivers need to feel confident that as they pull up to their fueling station, they're going to be able to successfully fuel. And I heard some very constructive and useful tips on that, including the inclusion of reliability, uptime requirements and maintenance contracts as part of any RFP that's establishing infrastructure, as well as encouraging news out of Oregon about the testing that's happening at the EV Island, and that we may be having something similar open up in California. It sounds like we don't know exactly what the issue is around reliability, whether it's component reliability or network connections, or even interoperability from vehicle to vehicle with specific infrastructure. But it sounds like there are folks that are looking into that and trying to figure that out. And it's not universal. There are fleets which are experiencing positive reliability with their infrastructure. In terms of public charging, I heard over and over that we need a lot of it and that we need to get started on building that infrastructure today, or in fact yesterday, and that it will take a lot of space compared to today's fueling infrastructure. These are good things to know about, to be aware of as part of understanding what the public charging network needs to look like. And I also heard that there is a need for improved tools for identifying sites that fleets might use, the ability to filter who the manufacturer of the infrastructure is, how long the cords are. That's interesting information, and maybe something that we can help with working with the site tools like PlugShare to see if that's something that could be included. And we also heard that improved interoperability will be key to making public sites usable. From a planning and decision-making standpoint, there's interest in sharing a list of consultants that can help fleets identify how they should proceed with infrastructure planning. And there's also an interest in developing a data sharing tool for fleets to self-identify what their rollout plans are and what their needs are, that could be shared with both fuel providers and with utilities and fuel providers to help get that conversation going and planning going. And on the design side of things, we repeatedly heard about the value of including renewables and on-site storage, energy storage, as a strategy for charging, and some back and forth about who pays for that and how well that can be integrated given space and funds and timing. From permitting, thank you for the comment about the legislation that was just passed. I think what we need to take from that is that we've got a job to do to educate authorities having jurisdiction about the passage of that law, to see what, to make sure that they're aware of it and are incorporating that into their decision making and their permit implementation. So thank you, everybody. I know that we talked about a lot more than that. Those were things that bubbled up. I know that our staff, including myself, were taking copious notes. We have the Q&A, which I hoped we would be able to bring some of that more into the conversation, but time didn't allow. Know that we were typing out answers, and we're keeping all of that conversation as part of our analysis here. I'll be interested if folks want to email us about how they felt this format worked today, as we move into our next session, which will be about hydrogen specifically on December 16th, and then our electricity and grid, as well as costs and funding in January. So I probably could have let one more person talk as we're coming up on the hour. But again, I want to thank everybody, and especially our state agency partners, for being part of this conversation. And we look forward to keeping that, that structure as we move forward for the rest of our meetings. So with that, thank you very much to everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Much appreciated.
Thanks, goodbye.
Bye.